I was just a blacksmith's apprentice, fixing tools for people who never looked me in the eye. But when the world fell into eternal twilight and monstrous creatures made of bones and fog began hunting the villages, I had no choice but to fight. Every beast I killed made me stronger, but changed something inside me. They said the hollow beasts were once human, that killing them was a curse. Now I'm on a journey across a dying land, chasing the origin of the first beast and the truth about what I'm becoming. They say the sun never truly dies, it only hides. But they're wrong. It was on the 22nd day of harvest, when the wheat should have been gold and the rivers brimming with meltwater, that the sky froze over in gray. Not storm clouds, not dusk, not fog, just a colorless dome of unmoving sky. The light dimmed. Shadows stopped shifting. And the sun simply didn't return. That was the day everything changed. I was standing in the forge, hammering a new edge onto an old sickle when the light flickered and failed. One moment, I was squinting through sweat and smoke. The next, it was as if someone had thrown a dark sheet over the world. The iron hissed as it hit the quench barrel, and I stood there, frozen, heart pounding louder than the anvil ever had. Outside, the village of Barrow fell into silence. Not the quiet of peace, the kind that comes before screaming. I stepped out from the forge with my apron still tied, blinking into the pale dimness. My father, Garin, stood a few paces away in the square, a hammer in his fist, knuckles white. "Stay close, boy," he said, but his voice didn't sound like his own. All around us, people were gathering, old widow Emmer clutching her rosary of bone beads, the baker's wife shielding her toddler under her shawl, even the mayor himself, grim-faced and silent. The air was too still. No wind. No birdsong. No smoke rising from chimneys. The world was holding its breath. And then the screams came. They rose from the edge of the village like wind tearing through trees. Not just screams, growls too. Something between a beast's snarl and a man choking on his own blood. I saw the blacksmith's dog bolt past, tail tucked, whining. Saw smoke rising, no, not smoke. Mist. Low, crawling mist that clung to the ground like fingers. We ran. My father pushed me behind the forge wall and grabbed his old war axe from the chest we never opened. He hadn't touched that blade since the border rebellion 15 years ago. When he held it, his eyes changed. The kind of change I never wanted to see in my father's face. He turned to me once, eyes fierce. "If something gets through, don't fight. Don't play hero. You run, you hear me." I nodded. Didn't speak. Couldn't. But I didn't run. Not that night. I saw it. The first of them. The thing that crawled out of the mist like it had been born from shadow and bone. It was shaped like a man, but wrong. Taller, joints bent the wrong way. No skin, just stretched sinew, glistening like wet leather, and a skull that glowed from within, pulsing faintly like embers in a fire. No eyes. Just hollow sockets that stared without seeing. It didn't run. It floated. And it was silent. My father roared and charged. His axe sang. The thing moved faster than thought. Claws that shimmered in the dark lashed out, but my father met it midair with a howl that shook the stones beneath us. The two clashed like thunder. And I froze. All around me, the village was under attack. Beasts, dozens of them, some tall, some twisted, all born of nightmares. People screamed. Fires started. I saw the baker fall, torn open from throat to stomach. I saw a child pulled into the mist. And still I did nothing. The creature my father fought let out a noise, no, not a sound. A feeling. It hit me like a hammer behind the eyes. Guilt, shame, rage. All not mine, and yet it was inside me. As if the beast knew what I feared. As if it fed on it. I stumbled backward, hit the forge wall, and slid to the ground. And I watched as my father, Garin, drove his axe through the creature's chest. It didn't die. It bled light. A pale, greenish glow that hissed as it hit the ground. And then it faded. Like smoke into air. Gone. My father stood panting, blood on his face, his or the beast's, I couldn't tell. He looked at me, opened his mouth, and something bigger stepped from the mist behind him. A thing with antlers made of bone and a face like cracked porcelain. No eyes, no mouth. Just long limbs and a spine that twisted like rope. It reached out with a hand that wasn't a hand, I screamed. Too late. It touched him. He convulsed. Dropped. The axe clattered on the cobblestones. He twitched once, then stilled. And the thing turned and vanished into the fog. That was the day the sun died. That was the day the hollow beasts came. And I swore as I held my father's body in the ash-colored dawn that I would find them. I would find where they came from. Why they took him. What they are. Even if I had to follow them into the darkest forest of Elarion. Even if it killed me. They burned the bodies the next morning. Some said it was to stop the spread of sickness. Others whispered that it was to keep the beasts from coming back. I think it was because no one could bear to bury people they'd known their whole lives and still see their faces twisted in fear. My father's body was the first to go on the pyre. I stood there, fingers clenched around the hilt of his axe. It still felt wrong in my grip, too heavy, too stained. The edge was dull. I hadn't dared to clean it yet. The flames reached up like angry hands, clawing at the gray sky that refused to brighten. Smoke rose thick and black, curling over the rooftops and drifting east toward the dark line of trees that marked the boundary of Elarion. The woods. The forest no one entered. And now everyone said the forest was waking. The village of Barrow had no more laughter. No more children running in the mud or elders gossiping under the tree near the well. Doors stayed shut. Curtains drawn. People spoke only when they had to, and even then only in whispers. But I couldn't stay still. That night, I climbed the old watchtower overlooking the edge of the valley. I didn't sleep anymore, not since I saw what took my father. I kept seeing it in my dreams, that long, skeletal hand touching him and the way his light dimmed. The mist still clung to the earth, but now it seemed to pulse faintly. Like something underneath was breathing. Watching. Waiting. And then I saw it. Far in the distance, just beyond the tree line, a plume of smoke. Not natural smoke. It rose in thin, steady columns. Controlled. Measured. Someone was out there. Or something. And it wasn't the village. Something's burning, I whispered to myself. Behind me, a voice replied, maybe it's another village. I nearly jumped off the tower. Gods, Leah. You scared me. Leah was the closest thing I had to a friend. We'd grown up together, though she'd always been quicker with her bow than I was with a hammer. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was steel beneath them now. Everyone had lost someone. Her brother, Rylan, was one of the first taken. I saw it too, she said, stepping beside me. The smoke. It's been rising every night since the attack. I stared at it. Why haven't we sent anyone? She snorted. Because Mayor Calder is a coward. I didn't disagree. For the last week, he kept everyone inside. He ordered patrols of the outskirts, but no one dared step past the tree line. Not after what happened to the scouts from Hallowfen. They'd found one of them curled up beneath a tree, eyes missing, mouth sewn shut by something that wasn't thread. Still alive. Barely. I said nothing, just kept staring at the smoke. I'm going, I muttered. Leah turned to me, brows raised. When? Tonight. She didn't argue. Didn't try to talk me down. Just nodded. I'll get my bow. We left an hour before midnight. No goodbyes. No explanations. Just silent steps through frost-touched grass and the crunch of our boots beneath us. I carried my father's axe on my back, its blade hidden under a burlap wrap. Leah had her bow, 2 quivers, and a dagger strapped to her thigh. The mist thickened as we neared the woods. It curled between our legs, coiled around our arms. It wasn't cold. It felt alive. Do you hear that? Leah whispered. I listened. It wasn't sound, not really. More like pressure. A thrum, like the heartbeat of something buried beneath the trees. Slow. Rhythmic. Wrong. We passed the broken boundary marker, a line of stones meant to warn travelers they were entering the forbidden forest of Elarion. The story said those who went beyond never returned. We kept walking. Inside the forest, everything was different. The air was heavier. The trees were twisted, their branches forming arches like cathedral ceilings. Strange growths pulsed on the bark, fungus that breathed faintly, glowing blue. Leah tapped my shoulder. There, ahead, between the trees, we saw light. Firelight. We moved silently, crouching behind roots and fallen logs until we reached the edge of a clearing. And then we saw them. Not beasts. Not villagers. Soldiers. 3 of them standing in a circle around a fire. Their armor was strange, not from any kingdom I knew. Pale, almost bone-white, with jagged edges and markings etched across their chests. Each wore a helmet shaped like a skull. But they weren't the strangest thing. No, that was the thing they were burning. A body. It twitched. Even from here, I saw the flesh wasn't right. The skin rippled, peeled back, stitched itself together. The fire hissed, fighting to consume it. They're trying to kill it, Leah whispered. I nodded. And then one of the soldiers looked up. Straight at us. We ran. Branches tore at our arms. Roots tried to pull us down. Behind us, we heard the shriek of metal and the unmistakable sound of pursuit. But not from behind. From in front of us. The forest moved. Trees shifted. Paths twisted. The woods were not a place, they were a presence. And it didn't want us there. Leah shouted, left? We veered, but something struck me. A flash of light, cold, not hot, slammed into my chest and knocked me into a bush. When I opened my eyes, the forest had gone silent again. Leah was gone. The soldiers were gone. And the forest was watching. From the shadows, a shape moved. Thin, elongated, wearing no armor, no clothes, just bones. And it whispered, words I didn't understand. Words that settled into the cracks of my skull like water freezing in stone. And then it pointed, not at me, but behind me. I turned and saw the tree. It was ancient, dead, twisted into a spiral, and its trunk was carved with a dozen glowing symbols. My breath caught, because one of them matched the mark on my hand. The mark I hadn't told anyone about. The one that had appeared the night my father died. And for the first time, I understood something. Whatever killed him, whatever took the light from the world, wasn't finished yet, and I was somehow part of it. They always called me Garen's boy, the blacksmith's son. The quiet one who never spoke out of turn, who learned the weight of metal before the weight of words. In Barrow, that was enough. You earned your name by what you did, and I was content to be the one who made tools that fed families, not stories that stirred fear. But standing in the heart of the Elarion woods, with blood drying on my skin and a mark glowing on my palm that pulsed like a heartbeat not mine, I realized that name no longer fit. I wasn't just a blacksmith's son anymore. I was something else, something chosen. Or cursed. I stood in the shadow of that dead tree, its spiral trunk towering above me like the spine of some buried god. The symbols carved into its bark pulsed faintly, casting eerie green light across the forest floor. One of them matched the mark on my hand exactly, 3 jagged slashes surrounded by a circle, like a claw that had torn through a sun. I didn't know what it meant, only that when I placed my hand against the tree, something stirred beneath the ground and the air shifted. The forest grew silent, unnaturally so, as though it were holding its breath. Then came the voice, not spoken, but pressed directly into my skull like iron against an anvil. You are marked, child of fire. He remembers you. I stumbled back, gasping, clutching my head as the tree's glow faded. My pulse thundered in my ears, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But I didn't. Not yet. Something inside me, some ember buried deep, kept me rooted in place, even as the bones of the forest groaned. I had to understand what this was. What I was. The mark hadn't been there before the hollow beasts came. It appeared the night my father died, the night the sky went gray and the sun refused to rise. And now it responded to something ancient in these woods. That couldn't be coincidence. I thought of Leah. I had to find her. She'd vanished when the forest shifted, swallowed whole by whatever curse lived beneath the soil of Elarion. I tried to retrace our steps, but the trees had rearranged themselves. Paths I thought I knew now looped back or led to cliff edges where none existed before. It was like walking through a dream stitched together by a mad god, each step unfamiliar, each sound untrustworthy. I called her name more than once, but the mist muffled my voice. Worse, it sometimes echoed back with a tone that wasn't quite my own. I clenched my father's axe tighter. It felt colder now. Hours passed, maybe more. Time didn't behave properly in the forest. The sky above never brightened, never darkened, just hovered in that same dull, smoky hue, neither night nor day. I started seeing shapes between the trees, figures that stood too still, too tall. At one point, I passed a clearing filled with statues that looked eerily like villagers. I didn't dare inspect them up close. I knew, without knowing how, that they weren't made of stone. Eventually, the trees thinned and I stumbled into a glade ringed with blackened stones. In its center stood a monolith, massive, obsidian, covered in more symbols like the ones on the spiral tree. But this one had a slit down the center as if it had been cracked by lightning. The moment I stepped into the ring, the air thickened and the mist stopped moving. Then the pain hit me, sharp and sudden, blooming across my marked palm like fire. I fell to my knees, gritting my teeth as the mark flared bright enough to blind me. The monolith responded. Its slit widened, not physically, but with a sound, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through my bones. Something inside it was waking up, watching. Then I heard a voice. Not like before. This one was real. Human. You shouldn't have come here. I turned quickly, the axe half raised, only to find a woman cloaked in feathers and ash standing at the edge of the glade. Her eyes glowed faintly, not with light, but with depth, as if they saw through time itself. She carried no weapons, but her presence was heavier than steel. She walked forward with the calm of someone who knew the forest would not harm her. You bear the mark of the hollow flame, she said. Few survive the awakening. Fewer still keep their minds. I asked who she was, but she only tilted her head. Names are given. Titles are earned. You, for instance, are still just a son grieving his father. But if you survive what lies ahead, you might become something more. She gestured to the monolith. You opened it. It will not close now. Not until the path is walked and the fire reclaimed. I demanded to know what that meant, what this mark was, why the beasts had come, but she only smiled, sad and distant. Answers are never given freely. Not in this forest. Not in this world. She paused. You must find the others. I stared at her. What others? The ones like you. The other marked. You think you were chosen alone? Her voice darkened. No. The hollow flame does not burn for one. It seeks balance. It seeks vengeance. She stepped backward, already becoming part of the trees. You'll know them when you see them. Each bears a different scar. Each survived the first night. But be warned, some of them may already be changing. And just like that, she was gone. Vanished as if she'd never been there. I sat there in the glade for a long time, listening to the hum of the monolith fade into silence. My hands still burned, but less now, more like a memory of pain than pain itself. I looked at the mark and finally understood the truth. Even if the details still eluded me, the beasts that came from the mist weren't just monsters. They were messengers. And their message wasn't death. It was a warning. The world was unraveling, and I was caught in its stitching. The blacksmith's son was dead. In his place stood something else. Something the hollow flame would burn through. I didn't sleep. Not because I wasn't tired. My body screamed for rest, my limbs heavy with exhaustion. But because the forest never let me forget I wasn't welcome. Even after the woman disappeared and the monolith dimmed, the glade pressed in on me like a breath held too long. The trees creaked and leaned closer, their bark pulsing with strange veins, as if they too were alive and listening. I waited until my heart slowed, until the pain in my hand faded to a dull throb, and then I moved on, walking deeper into the woods in the direction the woman had pointed. She hadn't left a trail, but something in me knew where to go, as if the mark on my palm was more than a brand, more like a compass, whispering not with words but with instinct. The further I walked, the more the trees changed. What started as twisted oaks and black pines soon gave way to white, bone-colored trunks, smooth and hollow, shaped like rib cages arched into the sky. They moaned softly in the wind, giving the place its name, the Bonewood. There was no sun above, no light source I could name, but the forest glowed faintly with the same sickly hue as the mist. Every step I took echoed like I was walking through a cathedral of the dead. I began to see things in the hollows, faces that flickered in and out of view, mouths moving without sound, eyes tracking me as I passed. I tried not to look directly at them. I think the forest liked that. When I did dare glance back, the faces were always gone, but their memory stayed lodged in my mind like splinters. Still, I pressed on. I had to find Leah, or the other marked ones the woman had spoken of. I had to understand what this flame was, why it chose me, and what it meant for the world I'd left behind. The farther I walked, the more that world felt like a fading memory. Barrow, the forge, my father's voice. They were being replaced by something older and darker. Eventually, I reached a clearing. It was quiet, unnaturally so. No wind, no whispering trees, just silence, thick and suffocating. In the center stood a small shrine made of antlers and bones, arranged in a perfect spiral. Around it, the ground was scorched in a wide circle, as if something had erupted there. My hand burned again as I stepped into the perimeter, and that's when I heard it. A whisper, not from the trees, but from the shrine itself. The words were foreign, rasping like ash dragged across stone, but I understood the meaning without needing translation. One of us remains. I knelt slowly, examining the shrine. Beneath the bones, hidden in the center of the spiral, was a pendant. It was shaped like an eye, cracked down the center, and pulsing faintly with red light. I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched it, the forest screamed. The ground split open with a sound like tearing flesh, and something surged from below. A shape made of writhing roots and shattered bone, rising like a corpse dragged from the grave of a god. It had no eyes, no face, only a long gaping maw that stretched from shoulder to shoulder, filled with rows of jagged teeth. It screamed again, not in rage but in hunger, and lunged at me. I barely rolled aside in time, the creature's weight collapsing the shrine in a shower of bone and dust. My axe came up by reflex, heavy and awkward, but when it struck the creature's side, it sparked, bright, white-hot and wrong. The axe was changing, not in shape but in purpose. It burned where it struck, and the creature recoiled, its roots catching flame. It shrieked and lashed out, sending me flying into a tree. Dazed, I barely registered the second voice that cut through the chaos. A roar, followed by the twang of a bowstring. An arrow slammed into the creature's chest, and then another and another. They burst into flame on impact, and the beast screamed as its body convulsed, retreating into the earth. I turned to see someone standing at the edge of the clearing. A figure cloaked in tattered robes, face covered in soot, a bow carved from blackwood in his hands. He stepped into the scorched circle and looked at me with tired, pale eyes. "You're late," he said, and loud. I sat up, coughing. "You one of the marked?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the broken shrine and picked up the pendant I'd dropped. He studied it for a moment before tossing it into a pouch at his side. "Name's Kale. I've been watching this place for 3 days. You just woke up whatever was left sleeping." I stood slowly, still catching my breath. "The forest brought me here." "No," he said, looking at me sharply. "The mark brought you. The forest just enjoys the show." I didn't understand what he meant, not fully, but I could see the same burn on his hand, the same sigil etched into his flesh, though his was older, cracked and scarred over like he tried to cut it out once. "How many of us are there?" I asked. "Used to be 7, Kale muttered. "Now, maybe 4, maybe less. Depends on who you believe. The hollow flame doesn't choose many, and it doesn't choose kindly." I didn't like the way he said it. "What is it?" "The hollow flame." He looked away, jaw clenched. "You'll know when it burns you from the inside out." That night, we didn't sleep. We sat by a fire Kale built from deadwood and dried mushrooms that hissed in the heat. He didn't talk much, but I learned enough. He'd been marked years ago, during the first darkening, long before the beasts came to Barrow. He'd watched his village fall, watched the mist rise, and followed the signs here, to the bonewood. He believed the hollow flame was a weapon, or maybe a curse, left behind by something older than the gods. "It burns in cycles," he said. "Every time the world grows too arrogant, too loud, it returns, finds its chosen. It makes them suffer, and if they survive, it lets them burn the rot away." I stared into the fire, my thoughts drifting back to my father, to Leah, to the mark that had chosen me. "And if they don't survive?" Kale's eyes reflected the flames. "Then the world burns without them." We kept the fire going through the night, and as I watched the embers dance, I realized something terrible and true. This wasn't a quest. It wasn't a calling. It was a trial by fire, and most of us weren't meant to survive it. But I wasn't going to die in this forest. Not without answers. Not without bringing light back to the place that stole everything from me. By dawn, or what passed for dawn in the Bowood, we were already moving again. Kale said the clearing wasn't safe after nightfall, that the things we disturbed might return once the fire died. I didn't argue. The pendant he retrieved from the shrine seemed to hum louder the deeper we walked, pulling us towards something neither of us could yet see. The air grew colder, the mist thicker, wrapping around our boots like hands trying to drag us back. But we pressed forward beneath those skeletal trees that swayed even when there was no wind. Kale didn't speak much, but when he did, it was sharp and efficient. He knew the forest's moods. He knew when to walk, when to freeze, when to breathe shallow. I followed close, every sense stretched thin. The deeper we went, the more I felt watched, not just by the trees, but by something beneath them. Something old. Something buried. Eventually, the woods broke into a jagged hollow, a massive sinkhole lined with stone steps carved into the earth. Moss covered the edges, slick and clinging. At its base sat a crumbled structure, half devoured by roots, with a roof of black shale and columns carved in the shape of twisted humanoid figures, some with wings, others with antlers or hollow eyes. Kale stopped at the edge and exhaled slowly. "This is where it begins," he said, "and maybe where it ends." We descended together, weapons drawn. The air was thick with decay, and every breath tasted like old iron. When we reached the bottom, I could hear the whispers, soft, constant, and layered. 1,000 voices overlapping in languages I didn't know but felt in my bones. The door to the structure had long since fallen, but the entry was still tight, choked with vines and debris. We forced our way through and entered a wide chamber lit only by the faint glow of fungus growing along the ceiling. The walls were covered in murals, faded but still legible. They showed figures, some human, some not, kneeling before a great flame suspended in the air. Behind it stood shadows, tall and crowned, with mouths open in silent screams. At the center of it all was the symbol we bore on our hands, the hollow flame. As I stared at it, the mark on my palm flared with heat, and something shifted inside me, a ripple like a memory surfacing that wasn't mine. Suddenly, I was no longer in the chamber. I stood in another time, watching a city burn beneath a blood-red sky. Giant beasts with hollow eyes rampaged through stone streets. Men and women fought them, wielding weapons of light and fire, their bodies marked like mine. I saw one of them fall, struck through the heart by a spear made of ash. His scream echoed across the vision, and when I blinked, I was back in the ruins, breathless and shaking. Kale was watching me, face pale. "You saw it too," he said. "Didn't you?" I nodded slowly. "A city. Fire. The end of something." He didn't look surprised. "This place remembers. It was one of the last outposts of the old flame before the hollow took hold. The memories, they linger. They cling to us. Some of them are warnings. Some are traps." We moved deeper into the ruin, descending narrow stairs that led to a chamber below. The whispers grew louder, sharper. I covered my ears, but the voices bled through. In the center of the chamber was a pit, circular and lined with runes that pulsed with red light. Kale approached it cautiously and knelt beside a figure slumped against the wall. It was a corpse, dried but intact. The mark burned on its hand, faded but familiar. "One of us," Kale whispered. "His name was Thorn. We thought he died fighting near the weeping spires, but he came here instead." I stepped closer and realized the man's eyes were still open. Still wet. He hadn't died long ago. Kale reached out to close the eyelids, but the corpse twitched. Then it spoke. Its voice was broken glass and smoke, and it came not from the mouth, but from the air itself. "Too late. The gate is broken. He is watching." The corpse convulsed and then dissolved into ash, scattering into the pit. I staggered back, heart pounding. Kale didn't flinch. "The dead talk in places like this," he said. "But it's not always them speaking." I stared at the pit. Something was beneath it. I could feel the heat rising from below like a forge stoked by unseen bellows. I asked Kale what it was. He hesitated, then said, "The Gate of Kindling. It's where they tried to bind the hollow flame in chains. It didn't work. The bindings broke and whatever was sealed leaked out." The pendant in his pouch began to glow red and pulsing. He pulled it out and held it over the pit. The runes responded, flaring bright, and the whispers stopped just for a second. The silence was worse. Then the chamber began to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling. Stones cracked, and from the pit rose a shape shimmering, flickering like heat over metal. It was not solid, not yet, but it had eyes, dozens of them, and a crown of twisted roots. It hovered just above the runes, watching us both. It didn't speak with words. It showed me things. I saw Leah, bound in vines, crying out for help somewhere deep beneath the forest. I saw the village of Barrow covered in ash, the forge where my father died cracked open like a skull. I saw more marked ones fighting, running, burning. And I saw myself standing at the edge of a cliff, the mark on my hand blazing like wildfire, my body alight, screaming as I struck down something massive. Then it was gone. The figure vanished back into the pit, the glow fading. The whispers returned, quieter now, like retreating waves. Kale exhaled, shaking his head. "That was a shade of the Hollow Sovereign. He remembers you." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't need to. The hollow flame wasn't just power, it was a beacon. A magnet. And the more we touched it, the more it touched back. But it had shown me Leah. She was still alive. That changed everything. We left the ruin before it collapsed entirely. The ground groaned beneath our feet, and as we emerged back into the bonewood, I felt something shift in the air. A new direction. A new pull. The forest was guiding us again. But this time, it wasn't just leading us. It was testing us. The forest changed after we left the ruins. The bonewood no longer whispered, it watched. Every branch curved subtly toward us, every gust of wind carried the scent of char and blood. I could feel it pulsing beneath the dirt like a sleeping thing stirring in its bed. The mark on my hand stayed hot, not burning but persistent, like it was reminding me who I was now. Not a blacksmith. Not a son. Not even a man, maybe. Just another ember caught in the storm. Kale moved with more urgency now, eyes constantly scanning the mist ahead. He said nothing, but I could sense the weight behind his silence. He'd seen something in the pit too. Maybe not the same as me, but something bad enough that even he, with his cold detachment and ragged calm, looked unsettled. We walked until the trees grew too thick for a straight path, forcing us into a gnarled detour through tangled roots and hanging moss that bled when we brushed against it. Eventually, the mist parted around a new clearing, but this one was wrong. too symmetrical. The trees stood in a perfect circle, their trunks smooth and white as bone. At the center was a lone figure kneeling beside a shattered tree stump, her face obscured by tangled silver hair. She wore a cloak torn and frayed at the edges, but even from this distance I saw the mark on her hand. Another of the chosen. Kale raised his bow slowly, but I stepped forward first. "Are you one of us?" I asked. She didn't answer, didn't even lift her head. I moved closer, cautious but unafraid. Something about her felt hollow, like the echo of a voice long faded. Her shoulders twitched, and then she began to hum, a soft, broken tune that crawled under my skin. I looked at the stump beside her and saw what she was staring at, dozens of tiny bones arranged in a spiral pattern. Birds, squirrels, something smaller. Each one was cracked open at the chest. Each one had been burned from the inside. Kale whispered behind me, "Step back. That's not normal grief." The woman raised her head slowly, and I froze. Her eyes were gone. Not gouged, not rotted, gone. Two perfect holes where vision once lived, and yet she turned her head as if she saw me perfectly. "The flame sings," she said in a voice full of ash. "But it does not love." I reached for my axe as she stood. Her movements were smooth, practiced, too fluid for someone who looked half dead. "We're like you," I said carefully. "We bear the mark." She smiled. Her teeth were blackened, filed to points. "You bear the ember, but I've tasted the fire. I let it in. I let it burn everything that was weak." Kale stepped beside me now, his bow aimed. "What's your name?" The woman tilted her head, blinking slowly with those empty sockets. "I had one, but it burned. Only ashes remain. You can call me what's left." She raised her hands, and fire burst from her palms, not warm and golden, but white-hot, with a tinge of violet, flames that hissed and screamed like they hated the air around them. Kale loosed an arrow, but the flame caught it midair, turning it to ash. I dove aside just as the fire exploded across the clearing, singing the edge of my cloak. When I hit the dirt, my axe surged in my grip, its edge glowing faintly. I didn't think, I let it move, let the weapon guide me. I charged. She met me head-on, moving like smoke and shadow, her hands wreathed in unnatural fire. Every swing of my axe met hers in a clash of flame and steel, sending sparks into the air. She was fast. Too fast. She ducked, spun, kicked my legs out from under me, and raised both hands to finish it with a blast of fire to the chest. But Kale was there. He tackled her from the side, slamming her into the ground. His dagger plunged toward her throat, but she caught his wrist and screamed. The sound wasn't human. It was the shriek of something burning alive, something ancient and betrayed. Kale reeled back, clutching his ears, and she hurled him aside with supernatural strength. I got to my feet and swung again, this time not with strength, but with intent. I wasn't just trying to kill her. I was trying to cut through the fire itself. My axe cleaved through her flame and bit into her shoulder, deep. She howled, not in pain, but joy. Yes, she screamed. That's what it wants. That's what it needs. She dropped to her knees, laughing as her body began to crack, heat pouring out of her skin like steam escaping a broken pipe. The mark on her hand glowed so bright it blinded me. "I was its voice," she whispered. "Now you'll be its sword." Then she exploded. Not into gore, into ashes. Her body collapsed into a whirlwind of burning dust, spiraling upward and vanishing into the branches above. The clearing went silent. I stood there, breathing hard, sweat pouring down my face. Kale got up slowly, rubbing his bruised ribs. "That was Talia," he muttered. "One of the first. She vanished years ago. We thought she died in the storming of Virehill." "She didn't die," I said, staring at the scorch marks where she'd knelt. "She surrendered." Kale looked at me with narrowed eyes. "To the flame?" I shook my head. "To something inside it. Something worse." We left the clearing quickly, the forest oddly quiet around us. No whispers. No movement. Like the trees themselves were watching in stunned silence. As we walked, Kale finally said, "You fought like her. But you didn't burn. Why?" I looked down at my hand. The mark still glowed faintly, but I didn't feel hollow. I felt anchored, grounded. I don't know, but I'm not letting it in. Not all the way. Not yet. Kale didn't argue. He just nodded and kept walking. That night, we made camp beneath a canopy of blackened thorns, too exhausted to care about comfort. As I lay beside the dying embers of the fire, I thought of Talia, of how her voice had trembled not with fear, but with faith. She believed the flame could be worshipped. That surrender was strength. I wasn't sure if she was right or if we'd only begun to glimpse the truth of what we carried inside. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just a hunt for Leah anymore. It was a war for our souls. The morning spire rose from the forest like a wound, tall and jagged, its stones cracked and slick with moss that oozed a faint, silvery fluid. We saw it from a ridge as the sun, what little of it broke through the Bonewood's veil, dipped low on the horizon. It didn't look like a watchtower anymore. It looked like a grave marker left behind by giants. Kale said the spire had once been a sentinel post built long before the flame chose anyone. Before the Hollow Sovereign fell. Before the world tilted sideways. They say it was the first place to fall when the fire started whispering, he added. The last beacon before the dark swept through the north. He didn't have to say more. We both felt the weight pressing on our shoulders as we approached, like gravity grew stronger with every step. The spire stood alone, surrounded by a circle of burnt trees whose charred limbs reached toward the tower as if begging for salvation. No birds. No insects. Not even wind dared to move here. I placed my hand on the stone and felt warmth, not from sunlight, but from something beneath. Something awake. Kale gestured toward the door, a slab of old oak half burned through and hanging by one hinge. He knocked twice with the hilt of his dagger. Nothing. Knocked again. This time, a voice called out from within, low, hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. If you burn with purpose, enter. If not, turn back before the flame consumes what's left of you. I stepped forward. We seek answers, I said, and someone who can help us survive what's coming. A pause. Then the door creaked open, slowly, groaning like an old man waking from a nightmare. The inside was dim, lit only by torchlight and the faint glow of runes etched into the walls. We stepped into a room that might have once been a war chamber, circular, ringed with broken weapon racks, faded banners, and old maps pinned with rusted nails. At the far end stood a figure, tall and gaunt, cloaked in black robes stitched with red thread. His face was hidden behind a mask, iron, shaped like a skull with a jagged crown. Only his eyes showed pale blue, unblinking, and sharp as razors. I am Varric, he said. Keeper of the spire. Last flame bearer of the first circle. Kale stiffened. You were supposed to be dead. Death and I came to an arrangement, Varric replied, his voice dry as dust. She takes my name. I keep my purpose. He motioned us forward and we obeyed. As we approached, I noticed the way the air shimmered around him, not from heat, but from pressure. Like the fire inside him had grown too large to stay quiet. You bear the mark, he said, staring at my hand. Unshaped. Untamed. Still human. Good. That won't last. He turned and walked toward a stone altar in the center of the chamber. Upon it sat a box sealed with 3 iron latches and bound in chain. Do you know what you are? He asked. Chosen, I said. Or cursed. He gave a hollow chuckle. Both. The flame doesn't choose lightly, but it doesn't care who survives the choosing. Most of us break. Some of us burn. A few, very few, become something more. He reached for the box and opened it. Inside was a book, ancient and bound in cracked leather. Its pages shimmered like they were made of pressed ember. This is the Codex Ignis, Varric said, written by those who first bound the flame. Before it was fractured. Before it became hollow. Kale leaned in. Why are you showing us this? Because one of you will need it, Varric said. Soon. The path you're walking leads to the ash basin. And the basin leads to the vault of embers. But to reach it, you must survive the trial of waking. And none pass it unprepared. He turned to me, eyes narrowing. The flame showed you something, didn't it? I hesitated, then nodded. A city burning. A beast with hollow eyes. Leah trapped beneath the earth. And me. On fire. Varric's mask tilted slightly, like a bird studying prey. You saw your possible end. The flame does that. It doesn't lie, but it doesn't speak plainly either. It offers temptations, warnings, reflections. The trial of waking will force you to confront all of it. Every weakness, every truth you'd rather bury. I clenched my fists. Then I'll face it. You say that now, he said. We all do. He handed me the codex. The moment my fingers touched it, I felt heat pulse through my arms, straight into my spine. The words on the pages shifted as I looked at them, forming sentences that seemed written in my own voice. Lessons. Rights. Visions. It was like reading a memory that hadn't happened yet. Study it tonight, Varric said. You won't get another chance. That evening, Kale and I sat on the top floor of the spire, beneath a broken dome open to the black sky. I read the codex while he kept watch. Thunder rolled far in the distance, though no storm had come. I saw drawings of creatures made of molten glass and bone, notes on the binding of fire to flesh, diagrams of a ritual I didn't understand, one involving sacrifice. Every page added weight to my chest. The flame was power, yes, but it demanded something back. Kale glanced at me. You think you're ready? No, I said honestly, but I think I'm willing. He nodded, approving. That might be enough. As the night deepened, I thought of Varric's eyes. Of Talia's laughter. of the whispers beneath the ruins and the screaming flame that lived just beneath my skin. I didn't know if I was the sword the flame needed or just another fool holding a blade too hot to wield. But I knew I had to keep going. Leah was still out there, and the Hollow Sovereign had already seen me. Whatever the trial of waking held, I would face it, even if it burned everything I was. The trial of waking did not begin with ceremony. There was no circle of flame, no ancient chant, no guardian waiting to test my worth. It began with silence. Varric led me down the winding stairs beneath the morning spire, each step colder than the last until the warmth of the fire above felt like a distant dream. We reached a chamber carved into the bedrock, its walls covered in spiraling script too old to read, pulsing faintly as if breathing. In the center stood a pool of dark water, motionless, rimmed by ash. The trial is not a fight, Varric said, his voice echoing in the stillness. It is not something you win. It is something you survive. If you lie to yourself, it will consume you. If you hesitate, it will break you. If you're lucky, it will show you what you truly are. He offered no more instruction, just turned and left, sealing the stone door behind him. I stood alone with the pool. The air buzzed around me, thick and dry. The Codex Ignis felt heavier in my hand. I dropped to one knee, stared at my reflection in the water, my face, worn and shadowed, eyes too old for my years. Then I plunged my hand into the water. The instant my skin touched it, I fell inward. It wasn't like dreaming. It was like falling through myself. My breath vanished. My body unraveled. Thought dissolved. Then, all at once, I was standing on scorched earth beneath a sky of flame, and everything I had buried clawed its way to the surface. The first thing I saw was my father. Not as he had died, but alive, standing beside the forge, his arms blackened with soot, his face hard with disappointment. You ran, he said, his voice like hammer on steel. When the flames came, you ran. When they took Leah, you watched. What kind of man does that? I stepped back, but the world shifted around me, dragging me forward. Behind him, the forge roared, not with fire, but with screaming. I saw the town again, burning. People I knew twisted in the smoke. Leah reached for me, her hand half melted, mouth open in a silent plea. I tried to speak, but my throat filled with ash. The heat was unbearable, searing into my bones. Then it was gone. I stood in a white field. Snow fell, gentle and soft, covering a graveyard of weapons, spears, swords, bows, all broken, sticking out of the ground like bones of forgotten wars. Kale knelt in the center, bleeding from his mouth, eyes wide. You think you can save her? He rasped. You can't even save yourself. I dropped to my knees beside him, but he crumbled to dust. The wind picked up, and with it came voices, thousands, whispering my name. I covered my ears, but they were inside my skull. Garen, they hissed. The ember is not yours. It uses you. You are the fire's fuel, not its master. Then came the hollow beast. It stepped from the snow with no sound, massive and coiled like a nightmare given form. Its face was a shattered mask of bone, eyes like burning voids, limbs too long, bent the wrong way. It walked like it remembered being human, but forgot what bones were meant to do. I ran. But the trial doesn't let you run. The snow turned to ash beneath my feet, and I was falling again, this time into the heart of the fire. The world vanished. There was only heat, not pain, truth. The fire stripped me bare. I saw every failure I had buried, every moment I had lied to myself. I saw Leah's smile turning to fear, saw my father's voice turn to silence, saw the line I kept walking between strength and surrender. And then, in the center of the fire, I saw myself, not as I was, but as I could be. I was standing on a mountain of ash, my cloak scorched, my axe glowing like a shard of dawn. My eyes burned with purpose. Around me stood others marked, like me. And behind us, the Hollow Sovereign rising from a storm of flame and ruin, laughing with a mouth that never moved. It wasn't a prophecy. It wasn't destiny. It was a choice. The fire asked, "Do you fear what you'll become?" And I answered, "Only if I stop before I begin." I awoke in the chamber, gasping for breath, soaked in sweat. The pool was gone, just a scorched circle on the stone floor. My hands trembled, but the mark on my skin no longer glowed red. It pulsed white, like the center of a forge at full heat. Varric stood in the doorway, watching silently. I looked at him, hollowed out and reborn. I passed, I whispered. He gave a slow nod. You woke. I rose to my feet, feeling like my bones had been reforged. Something inside me had changed, not healed, not hardened, but aligned. The fire was still there, still waiting to consume. But now I understood how to carry it. Not as a curse, but as a weapon. One that would burn only when I chose. Kale met me outside the spire, relief flickering across his face. You're still you, he said. Maybe not entirely, I said. But enough. We left the morning spire behind as dawn broke, a sickly red light pouring through the treetops. Ahead lay the ash basin, and beyond it, the vault of embers. Leah was closer now, and so was the truth behind the sovereign, the flame, and the war that waited for us all. I was ready to face it, even if it meant walking into the heart of fire. The ash basin was unlike anything I had seen before, even in the visions twisted by the trial. It wasn't a desert, though the ground was dry and cracked. It wasn't a ruin, though remnants of something ancient jutted from the earth like broken ribs. It was a grave, a wide, sunken wound where the world had burned and never recovered. Smoke rose in lazy spirals from fissures that never cooled. The soil was black and brittle, crunching beneath our boots like old bone. No wind, no sun, just a sky of ash that hung low enough to taste. Cale pulled his scarf up and narrowed his eyes. "I thought it'd be hotter," he muttered. I shook my head. "This isn't heat, it's memory." And I meant it. The entire place felt like a dying breath, something that once roared with fury, now exhaling only silence. We moved carefully. The ground was treacherous, full of hidden sinkholes and soft spots that could swallow a man whole. Strange shapes dotted the basin, statues, maybe, or monuments half-melted by whatever fire had passed through here. But they weren't made of stone. As we got closer to one, I realized it was a body. Not fresh, not rotting. Preserved in ash, perfectly still, arms reaching toward the sky as if frozen mid-scream. Cale knelt beside it, brushing away dust. "They didn't burn," he whispered. "They were turned into this." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because the longer I looked at them, the more I recognized the agony carved into their faces: fear, betrayal, and something deeper. Recognition. They had seen what came for them, and they knew they could not escape. As we pressed on, the stillness broke. It began with whispers, faint and scattered, like someone murmuring just behind me. When I turned, there was nothing but haze. Then the air thickened. A sound like dry leaves scraping against each other filled the space between our heartbeats. And then we saw them. Ember wraiths. They rose from the cracks like smoke-given shape, draped in robes of flame-streaked shadow, their faces hidden behind scorched bone masks. They floated more than walked, moving with purpose but no urgency. They didn't scream or snarl. They simply reached out with clawed fingers as if inviting us into their emptiness. Cale drew his blades. I felt the flame inside me stir, eager, pulsing like a second heartbeat. But something told me not to attack. "They don't see us," I said. "Not yet." We slipped between them, holding our breath, stepping lightly. Every movement felt like it echoed across 1,000 invisible threads. One wrong twitch, one snapped twig, and they'd be on us. At the basin's center stood a mound of collapsed stone, broken pillars forming the skeleton of what may have once been a temple. And there, half buried in ash, was a door. Not made of wood or stone, but of black metal carved with sigils that flickered like dying stars. "The vault," Cale said. "Or what's left of it." But something was wrong. The closer I got, the colder I felt. Not just skin deep, but in my blood, my bones, my soul. The flame recoiled. I felt it dim, uncertain. That had never happened before. I knelt by the door, placing my hand on the black surface. It wasn't cold. It was dead. Like touching something that had once been alive and powerful but had bled out long ago. And in that moment, I heard a voice, not aloud, but inside my mind. "You come late, bearer of fire. The hollow one has already passed through." I stumbled back, heart pounding. Cale grabbed my arm. "What did you see?" I looked at the door again and whispered, "The sovereign was here. Not long ago." The realization struck like a hammer. We weren't chasing a ghost or legend, we were following a trail that had only just gone cold. And worse, he had reached the vault first. But what had he taken? We entered cautiously. The vault's interior was vast and circular, lined with crumbling shelves, shattered relics, and deep etchings on the wall that pulsed with dying emberlight. At the center stood an altar, but whatever had been placed upon it was gone. Only a scorch mark remained, jagged, black, and twisted. Cale stepped beside me, jaw tight. He took it. I nodded. Whatever power was buried here, he has it now. Before we could say more, the ground trembled. A soft groan echoed through the chamber. The ember wraiths had felt it too. They were coming. "Move," I said, grabbing Cale's wrist. We ran back through the temple ruins as the whispers turned to shrieks. Shadows spilled into the basin like a tide, hands grasping, voices pleading in languages I didn't know. We barely made it to the edge of the crater when the ground split open behind us, and from that breach rose something new, not a wraith, not a man. A guardian, or what remained of one. It had once been human. I saw that in its armor, in the cracked remnants of a banner fused to its shoulder. But its flesh had been replaced by emberstone, molten veins glowing beneath cracked skin. Its face was hidden behind a burning helm shaped like a sun with jagged rays. And it held a weapon I'd only seen in the Codex, a flare blade forged in the first fires of the Ember Pact. "It's testing us," I said, heart racing. guarding what's left of the vault. Kale raised his blades, but I stepped forward, fire crawling up my arms. "No," I said. "This is mine." And I charged. The fight was nothing like I'd faced before. The Guardian moved like fire given purpose, slashing with arcs that melted stone. I dodged, rolled, struck low, but my axe barely dented its shell. Then the flame inside me surged, and I remembered the ritual in the Codex. I whispered its first line, and my blood ignited. Flame wrapped around my weapon. My next strike didn't glance, it carved, seared, broke. The Guardian reeled, stunned. Kale took the chance and threw a dagger into its eye. Together, we brought it down, fire and steel in tandem. When it fell, it didn't scream. It knelt as if acknowledging us before turning to ash. We stood there, panting, shaken, victorious. I looked back at the vault. The Sovereign had left us nothing except a warning. We were too slow. He had claimed something meant to stay buried, and the world would pay for it. But we had survived the basin, and now we had direction. South toward the dead expanse, where the Sovereign's shadow was heading, where Leah's trail continued, and where a true war would begin. The path to the dead expanse was less a road and more a scar, a ragged fracture across the land where even time seemed reluctant to pass. The basin faded behind us in a haze of smoke and memory, but its chill clung to our backs like a shadow. Ahead lay a desolation that stretched beyond the curve of the world, where nothing grew and nothing dared to rest. The expanse earned its name not through legend or poetry, but through sheer, unrelenting truth. It was death, petrified and preserved across miles of cursed ground. There were no landmarks, no hills or rivers or trees, just gray dust, cracked shale and bones. So many bones, half buried in the endless flatness, stretching to the horizon like white weeds sprouting from the earth. We moved with caution, keeping our pace steady and our eyes sharp. The Codex had little to say about this place. Only cryptic warnings etched in fire script. Speak no name, claim no ground, wake no dust. Kale scoffed at that. "What dust isn't already awake in this place?" he muttered. I didn't answer. I could feel the silence pressing down, thick and unnatural. Even the wind refused to speak here. My own footsteps felt too loud, like I was treading across the ribs of some ancient god that had died screaming. There was power buried here, power that should have stayed forgotten. The deeper we went, the stranger things became. Time began to slip. One moment it was high noon, the next a pale twilight with no sun to cast the light. Shapes flickered in the distance. Towers, spires, even cities. But whenever we approached, they crumbled into dust or vanished into the mist. I stopped trusting the horizon. I stopped trusting my own eyes. We walked until our legs burned and our minds dulled, stopping only when the fatigue threatened to unravel us. But even in rest, the expanse offered no peace. The dreams were worse here. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw fire. Not the kind that roared and raged, but a fire that whispered, coiling into my thoughts, pulling memories I hadn't touched in years. I saw Leah, standing on a crumbling bridge, her eyes hollow, mouth open in silent accusation. I saw my father's forge turn to ruin, and Kale bleeding out in the ash beside me. And each time, the Sovereign's voice echoed behind it all. What burns must break, what breaks must kneel. On the third day, we found the remains of a battle, if battle was even the right word. It was a massacre. Hundreds of suits of armor lay in perfect formation, swords still raised, shields locked. But there were no bodies, only dust and that terrible silence. At the center of the field stood a blackened obelisk, half buried, cracked straight down the middle. Runes were carved across its surface, and though they were faded, I recognized the language. Old Ember, the tongue of the pack's first flames. I approached carefully, tracing the rune with my fingers. Kale stayed back, his posture tense. "Something's wrong here," he said. "This whole place. It feels like a trap set centuries ago, still waiting to be sprung." He was right, because the moment I touched the obelisk, it woke. The ground shuddered beneath our feet. The wind returned with a howl, and the sky darkened, not with storm or smoke, but with wings. Dozens of them, creatures like no beast I'd ever seen. Long, skeletal things with ember-glowing ribs and faces wrapped in chains, gliding soundlessly through the air. They circled above the obelisk like vultures tasting prophecy. Kale drew both swords, backing toward me. "Tell me you didn't just activate a beacon." "I didn't mean to," I muttered. But even as I said it, something called to me from inside the stone. Not a voice, a pull, a memory, my own yet not. And then I saw her. Not a vision, not a dream. A figure emerged from behind the obelisk. Wrapped in a weathered cloak, her dark hair braided back, her gait cautious but strong. Her eyes met mine and my breath caught. Not because of fear, not because of shock, because it was Leah alive. Kale swore beside me, but I barely heard him. I stepped forward, heart thundering. "Leah," I asked, voice barely a whisper. She didn't smile. She didn't run to me. She simply nodded and said, "You shouldn't have come here." I couldn't move, couldn't think. I had buried her memory beneath a mountain of fire and grief, and yet here she stood, unchanged. But there was something wrong. Her skin was too pale, her eyes too distant, like a reflection cast on water just before it ripples. "How?" I asked. She didn't answer me. She turned to the obelisk and pressed her hand to its surface. Instantly, the creatures in the sky let out a collective shriek and scattered, vanishing into the clouds. The wind died again. The tremors ceased. She turned back to me, voice quiet but firm. "He has what he came for, the shard of the Ember Crown, and he's heading to the Godspine." The Godspine. The name hit me like ice. A mountain range said to pierce the heavens, home to the last sealed gate of the Hollow Sovereign. If he reached it with the shard. "You're real," I said, reaching toward her. "You're actually—" But her form flickered, like a flame in wind, and for a brief instant, I saw the truth. Her face hollowed by death, eyes burning with emberlight, her body bound in spectral chains. She wasn't alive. She had been taken, twisted, held together by will or curse or something worse. "I don't have much time," she said. "He's using me to draw you in, but there's still a way, a path through the expanse. Follow the bloodstone trail to the Iron Risen. They know what he's truly after." Then she stepped back and vanished into ash. I fell to my knees. Kale didn't say a word. He just stood behind me, watching the sky. We had our path now, and a terrible truth. The Sovereign hadn't just claimed power. He was building something meant to end us all. We followed the bloodstone trail at dawn, though in the dead expanse, dawn was little more than a softening of the sky's ever-present gray, like an old bruise fading slightly but never healing. The trail wasn't a path so much as a broken chain of glowing red stones embedded in the earth, pulsing faintly like a dying heartbeat. Kale stayed quiet for once, letting the silence do what it did best, whisper doubt. I couldn't shake the image of Leah, her face real and yet not, her voice threading through my mind like smoke that refused to dissipate. She was dead or worse, and if she could still speak, it was only because something darker than death allowed her to. The terrain around us changed slowly. The barren dust gave way to warped, metallic debris half swallowed by the earth. Long-forgotten machines twisted into grotesque shapes. Spines of steel, wheels fused with bone, limbs clawing upward like they had tried to escape burial. These weren't ruins from some war of men. They were remnants of the old flame engines. Constructs built by the Ember Pact to fight monsters that could not be killed by sword or spell. It was said the Iron Risen had once turned the tide against the Sovereign's ancestors, massive war forms with souls bound into their cores by fire scribes and oath-binders. And then they were silenced, buried, forgotten. Now they were stirring. It started with the hum, low and constant, like the vibration of a forge bellows or the beat of a colossus heart beneath the stone. The closer we came to the mountain hollow Leah had mentioned, the louder it grew, until it throbbed in my bones and set my teeth on edge. The bloodstone trail led us to the mouth of a cavern half hidden beneath a hill of rusted armor. Symbols scorched into the stone glowed as we approached, and the air grew warm, not unpleasantly, but with the promise of something watching. Kale hesitated. "They might not be friendly." "Neither are we," I said, and stepped into the dark. The tunnel beyond was wide enough for a giant to crawl through, though I doubted giants had ever lived here. The walls were carved with overlapping circles and sigils that pulsed in rhythm with the bloodstones, like veins carrying fire deeper into a slumbering body. We moved carefully, our torches unnecessary as the ambient glow painted everything in shifting reds and golds. And then we saw them, the Iron Risen, dozens of them, suspended from the walls like sleeping gods, each one at least 3 times the size of a man, forged from blackened steel and emberglass, their forms a fusion of man, beast, and machine. Some had wings folded against their backs like insect carapaces. Others had 6 arms or none at all. Every one of them bore the Ember Pack's insignia burned into their chests, a flaming crown split down the center. They didn't move, they didn't breathe, but they watched. Even in stillness, I felt the weight of their presence pressing against my soul like an anvil. And then one woke. Its eyes snapped open, twin coals blazing through a cracked helm. Steam hissed from its joints, chains unraveled from its arms. It stepped down from the wall without a sound, landing before us like a falling star. Kale raised his blades. I didn't. The flame inside me pulsed, not in warning, but in recognition. "You carry the spark," the Iron Risen said. Its voice was deep, metallic, like 2 anvils grinding together in speech. "And the mark of fire blood. State your purpose." I stepped forward, heart steady. "The hollow sovereign walks again. He has taken the shard of the Ember Crown and means to open the gate at the Godspine. We were told you know his true plan." The machine tilted its head, evaluating me like a smith inspecting a flawed blade. Others began to stir behind it, not fully waking, but listening. The one before me took a slow step forward, its metal fingers curling like a hand recalling the feel of a weapon. "He seeks not power," it said, "but unmaking. The crown is not a tool. It is a key, one that unlocks the memory of fire. And through that memory, he intends to rewrite the world." Kale frowned. "What does that even mean?" The Iron Risen turned to him. "Before the world was shaped by stone and sea, it was shaped by fire. Raw, wild, and absolute. The Ember Crown holds the last living ember of the first flame. With it, the sovereign will breach the Godspine and awaken what sleeps beneath." "And what sleeps beneath?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. The Iron Risen looked to the ceiling, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in its glowing eyes. "The architect." Silence fell like a blade. Kale's face twisted in confusion, but I felt it. A cold, ancient dread settling in my chest. The architect wasn't a name. It was a title. The one who built the world. The one who burned it once before to start again. Myth said the Ember Pact had sealed it beneath the Godspine with chains of light and bone, never to awaken again. If the sovereign sought to break that seal, he's going to destroy everything, I whispered. "No," the Iron Risen said. "He's going to remake it. A world without the pact, without memory, without resistance." Kale stepped forward, expression hard. "Then help us stop him." The Iron Risen looked between us. "We cannot walk the world again without a bearer to lead. One who binds flame and oath. One who remembers. You carry the spark, but will you carry the weight?" The others began to stir now, one by one, their eyes lighting up, their chains unfastening. The chamber shuddered with awakening, and I understood. This was no request. This was a binding. I looked at my hands, the faint ember scars glowing beneath the skin. I thought of Leah, the basin, the fire, the hollow things rising in the sovereign's wake. I thought of the Forge Father's words, "Only fire can answer fire." "I'll carry it," I said. The Iron Risen stepped aside. Then we walk again. With a grinding roar, the Iron Risen came alive. Dozens of war forms stepping down from their walls, weapons emerging from hidden racks, ancient engines flaring to life in the walls. A forgotten army of flame and iron. The Ember Pact reborn, and I, Garen, its unwilling general. The war had begun, but now we had soldiers. The Iron Risen did not march. They shook the world beneath them. Each step cracked the stone, sent dust clouds curling into the sky, and reminded the earth that something ancient and terrible had awakened. We emerged from the cavern not as fugitives, but as a procession of fire-forged vengeance, a war-born storm crawling across the skin of the world. Behind me, dozens of constructs moved in disciplined silence, weapons fused to their limbs, engines pulsing with internal flame. These were not men, not even monsters. They were memories given shape and steel and rage, and I was the one they had chosen to follow. Kale, ever the skeptic, walked beside me with his blades sheathed but his hand never far from them. "You sure about this?" he asked as we crossed a ridge, the dead expanse beginning to thin behind us. "Because I've seen gods rise and fall, but I've never seen machines take orders from a blacksmith with a bad attitude." "I'm not giving them orders," I said. "I'm giving them a reason." He grunted. "Same thing." The land ahead of us was a broken stretch of scorched valleys and melted peaks known as the Worm Plain, a battlefield long abandoned, where Dragonkin once fought against the Ember Pact until both sides fell into ruin. Ash still drifted in the wind like dying snow. We needed to cross it if we were to reach the edge of the Godspine, where the Sovereign had reportedly begun his ascent with the shard of the Ember Crown. Leah's voice echoed in my head, her warning like a splinter under the skin. "He's using me to draw you in." I knew this was a trap, but I also knew it was a trap I had no choice but to spring. The Iron Risen moved as one, their pace tireless, their internal flames leaving long glowing trails behind them. Birds fled the sky, animals vanished from the terrain. Nothing living remained near our path. And then we saw it, signs of the Sovereign's passage. Great gouges in the land, dead trees twisted into unnatural shapes, and markings burned into stone in the shape of a fractured crown. At first, I thought they were symbols of conquest. Then I realized they were seals, and they had been opened. Kale knelt beside one of them, touching the edge of a scorched rune. "This one's fresh. Within a day." "Then he's close," I said. "No," rumbled one of the Iron Risen beside me. Varkle, a broad, quadrupedal warform with a shattered helm and a voice like crushed gravel. "He is far, but what he freed here is not." I tensed. What did he release? Varkle didn't answer with words. Instead, he raised a massive claw and pointed to the horizon. And there it stood, a beast, no, a thing, rising from the cracked plain like a creature born from the end of time. Towering, skeletal, and wrapped in tendrils of molten darkness. It moved like it didn't belong to this world, each step warping the ground with impossible gravity. Its head was a crown of horns and burning eyes, its limbs ending in claws that carved through stone like paper. I had only ever heard of its kind in the Forbidden Histories, a hollow WYRM. Once believed extinct, these abominations had been created by the Sovereign's ancestors to devour entire strongholds of Pact resistance. They didn't just destroy, they erased, unmaking everything they touched. One had ended the Southern Rebellion in a single night, and now one stood between us and the Sovereign's trail. Kale drew both swords. "You want to run?" "No," I said. "We stand." The Iron Risen stepped forward as one, forming a battle line across the ridge. Their bodies unfolded into war configurations, plates shifting, flame vents opening, weapons extending from their arms and shoulders. One by one, they locked into place like ancient siege weapons awakening from dream. The WYRM saw us then, its head tilted, and from its mouth came a sound. No roar, no hiss, but a laugh, stretched across frequencies that made my ears bleed and my thoughts fracture. I could feel it clawing at my memory, trying to unmake me with sound alone. But the flame inside me held. I stepped forward, lifted the codex, and ignited the binding rune etched across its spine. Fire blazed across the pages, not destroying them, but revealing what had been hidden. A battle rite, pact-born, written in the tongues of both men and machine. "Bind fire to form," I whispered, and the Iron Risen echoed it as one. "Bind fire to form. Forge soul to steel. Forge soul to steel." Let the WYRM remember why it fears the flame. The hollow WYRM charged. It moved like a nightmare, its body trailing shadow, its maw opening wide enough to swallow 3 of our warforms whole. But the Iron Risen did not flinch. They launched themselves at the beast with impossible coordination. Missiles of molten corelite, blade arms spinning with infernal velocity, flame cannons searing its limbs. Kale was already moving, a blur of silver steel as he carved a path through the lesser shadows trailing behind the WIRM. I joined him, channeling the flame through my veins, every strike a surge of heat and memory. The WIRM fought back with chaos. It screamed in voices that weren't voices, swiped with limbs that changed shape mid-swing, and unleashed bursts of nullfire that erased matter from existence. We lost 3 Iron Risen in the first 5 minutes. One disintegrated entirely, another was torn apart by shadow vines, and the last exploded in a burst of dying flame. But they held. We held. Kale and I reached its underbelly just as Varkle landed a direct hit to its neck, knocking the beast off balance. Now! I roared and plunged my blade into a crack between its plates. The flame surged into it, not to destroy, but to ignite what remained inside. I felt its mind scream. I saw visions of other worlds, other skies, all consumed by its hunger. And then I burned it. The WIRM collapsed in a spiral of smoke and flame, its body dissolving into black ash that scattered across the plain like ink spilled across a blank page. Silence returned, heavy and triumphant. We stood amidst the wreckage, breathing hard, the Iron Risen slowly reforming ranks. The battle was over, but it had sent a message to the Sovereign, to his hollow court, to whatever watched from beyond the gate. The Ember Pact was no longer dead. It was marching, and I was no longer just Garen, the blacksmith's son. I was Garen, bearer of the Codex Flame, breaker of hollow WIRMs, and the world would remember us. The WIRM was dead, its bones scattered across the worm plane like relics of a nightmare, but its death didn't bring peace. Only silence, tense, unfinished, like a blade half-drawn from its sheath. We made camp at the edge of the battlefield, the Iron Risen forming a protective ring around the perimeter, their bodies cooling, hissing with vented steam. They didn't sleep. They didn't need to. But I did. Or at least, I tried. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it wasn't rest. It was vision. I stood in a city of fire. Not burning, born of fire. Towers made of living emberglass stretched into a sky split by molten veins. Roads of scorched obsidian pulsed beneath my feet, and everywhere I turned, flames danced in human shapes, whispering in tongues I almost understood. A great fortress stood at the center, its gates wide, its interior filled with chants and metal, the sound of forges ringing like war drums. I knew this place, even if I'd never seen it before. This was Solvarn, the Flamehold, heart of the original Ember Pact. A city lost to myth. Only it wasn't lost. It was remembered. And somehow I was there. The Codex Flame hovered before me, its pages open, blank, and glowing. I reached for it, and suddenly the world fractured. Flames went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The city cracked down the middle, and from the gap rose a figure draped in ash-black robes and bone-white light. His face was mine. Not similar. Mine. "You're too late," he said in my voice. "You're not the first. You're not the last. You're the echo." I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat like molten stone. He raised a hand, and I saw it, another codex, corrupted and cracked, its flames inverted. The fire that came from it was cold, devouring not warmth, but memory. "I've already burned the world once," the other me said. "And I'll do it again. Because the only thing more dangerous than the Sovereign is you." I woke up gasping, fists clenched, the codex pulsing beside me as if it too had dreamed. Kale was already on his feet, sharpening a blade that didn't need sharpening. He gave me a sidelong glance. "You were talking in your sleep. Sounded like you were arguing with yourself." I rubbed my eyes. "Maybe I was. You want to share with the class?" I shook my head. "Later. We move at dawn." The worm plane narrowed into a gorge choked with broken statues and ash-petrified trees. We advanced cautiously, the Iron Risen scanning for signs of hollow corruption. As we passed under a shattered arch marked with packed runes, the world shifted, a lurch in the air, a shimmer across the landscape like a veil had been pulled from my eyes. Suddenly, we stood not in the real world, but a reflection of it. The same gorge, the same rocks, but everything was burned, frozen in a state of eternal ruin. Kale turned to me, frowning. "Did we just?" "Yes," I said. We crossed into an echo. Echoes were fractured remnants of old battles, places soaked in so much packed fire and hollow magic that they replayed their final moments over and over in a loop. They were dangerous, unstable, sometimes haunted, and sometimes useful. The Iron Risen hesitated. Even they seemed affected, flickering slightly, their flame cores dimming. Then a sound echoed through the burned valley, a scream, long and high and filled with fury. Then another, and another. We weren't alone. The first of them came from the broken fog, shapes made of glass and ember, twisted silhouettes of fallen packed warriors. Flame ghosts. Soldiers who had died with fire in their veins and vengeance in their hearts, trapped in the final moment of their death. They looked like men until they opened their mouths and screamed. The battle was fast and brutal. The Iron Risen fought with precision, but the flame ghosts couldn't be killed normally, they had to be remembered. Their names, their stories, their purpose. And that burden fell on me. The codex opened in my hands, pages flipping on their own as fire curled around my wrists. I saw names etched in light: Corin of the Broken Bell, Sereth Flame Weaver, Baal the Emberite. Each name I spoke aloud unraveled a ghost, sending it to rest. But with every memory I touched, I felt them dying again, their pain, their regret, their hope. By the time the last ghost fell, I was on my knees, lungs full of ash, heart pounding. Kale pulled me up roughly. "You okay?" "No," I said honestly. "But I'm learning." We exited the echo at dusk, the shimmer fading as we crossed a boundary stone half swallowed by roots. And waiting for us beyond the ridge was something worse than flame ghosts. The Hollow Sovereign's sigil burned in the sky like a second sun. He knew we were coming, and he was no longer running. The sky had changed. It wasn't just darker, it was wrong. The clouds churned in unnatural spirals and lightning flashed without thunder. The Hollow Sovereign's sigil remained etched above the horizon like a wound in the heavens, pulsing faintly in rhythm with the Codex Flame's heartbeat in my pack. I knew then that every step forward pulled me deeper into his design. We weren't just marching toward him anymore. We were entering a realm where he made the rules. We crossed into the gray shade pass by morning, a jagged valley flanked by skeletal cliffs and half-buried ruins that whispered the names of the dead when the wind passed through them. This was the place the Ember Histories called the Crownless Path, named for the warriors who had once defied the Ember Pact and the Sovereign both. They had walked away from thrones, from fire, from allegiance. Not traitors. Not loyalists. Something else. Rebels without a banner. Ghosts in flesh. According to the Codex, a few of them had survived the wars. Fewer still had chosen exile, hiding here beyond pact memory. If they still lived, they might know how to breach the Godspine, a mountain chain said to guard the Sovereign's final sanctum. But there was risk in seeking them out. Men who run from fire rarely welcome it when it returns. Kale was growing more restless with every step. "This place smells of betrayal," he muttered as we followed an ancient path carved into the canyon wall. "You think they'll help us?" "No," I said, "but I think they'll hate the Sovereign more than they hate us." "And that's supposed to be comforting?" "No," I said again. "It's supposed to be leverage." We found them near dusk. Or more accurately, they let us find them. We were halfway across a stone bridge spanning a dead ravine when the first arrow struck the dirt an inch from my foot. The second landed beside Kale's shoulder. By the third, the Iron Risen had formed a protective ring, but no counterattack came. Just a single voice, cold and flat, calling from the fog, "Garen of the Flame. Lower your weapon. You walk the path of the unclaimed." I raised my hand slowly. "We seek passage." Nothing more. Silence. Then figures emerged, 6 of them cloaked in ash-gray robes and armor etched with broken sigils. Their eyes were dark, but their movements were measured. Not hollow. Not corrupted. Just tired. One stepped forward, tall, hooded, and missing his right hand. His voice was sharp, almost too sharp, as if every word was forged to cut. "Passage comes with price." "What price?" "Memory." I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. He gestured, and I stepped forward alone. He placed his hand over my chest, right where the flame burned beneath my ribs, and I felt a cold jolt snap through me. Suddenly, I was not in my body. I was watching myself, from outside. A boy in a forge. A father teaching him to hammer steel. A girl laughing at the edge of a well. The fire that took the village. The corpse of a brother. The first time I touched the Codex. Every moment I'd built myself on, ripped from me and held in the stranger's hand like glass beads. Then he let go. I collapsed to my knees, panting. "You may pass," he said quietly. "You carry pain. That makes you real." The others stepped aside. We followed them through a hidden crevice in the stone, into a settlement carved into the canyon walls, houses built from wrecked packed war machines, torchlight flickering against old banners used as shelter cloth. Children ran barefoot in the dust. Adults watched with wary eyes. I realized these people weren't warriors anymore. They were survivors. And they hated us not because we were dangerous, but because we reminded them of the fire they'd buried to stay alive. That night, I sat with the one-handed man. His name was Marek, once a general in the Ember Pact before it fell. He told me of the god spine and of the path through it, one road, sealed by flame, passable only by someone who bore both ember and hollow within them, me. I don't want to be that bridge, I said. No one does, Marek replied. But someone always must. He handed me something wrapped in cloth. When I unwrapped it, I found a shard of the original pact flame, a sliver of pure memory fire, bright and hungry. Take it, he said. You'll need it when your own fire falters. I stared at it long after he left. The night grew quiet. The Iron Risen stood motionless around the camp, and Kale leaned against a stone pillar nearby, arms crossed. You trust them? He asked. No, I said. But I don't have to. Just like they don't have to trust me. He nodded once. Then we march at first light? Yes, I said. Straight into the god spine. As I lay back beneath the stars, the codex warmed against my side. And for a moment, I thought I heard the sovereign's voice in the wind. Keep coming, it whispered. I've saved the last truth for you. Dawn did not rise gently in the god spine, it erupted. The first light fractured across jagged peaks like molten glass, bleeding gold and crimson through the clouds. It wasn't natural sunlight, it felt forged, deliberate, as though the mountain itself rejected softness. We began our ascent in silence, the path winding like a scar up the cliffside, flanked by statues of long-dead warriors whose eyes bled ash and whose names had been erased by time. They watched us pass, unmoving sentinels frozen in gestures of agony or defiance. I wondered how many of them had tried and failed to reach what we now sought, the Burning Gate. The climb drained even the Iron Risen. Their flame cores dimmed under the pressure of the god spine's aura, and Kale, despite his relentless endurance, began to slow, his eyes haunted by things I couldn't see. The mountain had power here. Old power. It whispered not with words but with weight, dragging unseen memories into the air around us, thickening every breath, pressing down on our thoughts like a storm about to break. Then the illusions began. It started small, shadows that flickered at the edge of vision, familiar voices echoing off the rocks. Then came the guilt forms conjured from whatever deepest regret each of us carried. I saw Kale draw his sword against a woman cloaked in blood and chains. I saw two of the Iron Risen freeze completely, caught in loops of flickering memory, flames guttering. One of them knelt before the ghost of a burning child, whispering a name I didn't recognize before disintegrating into nothing. The mountain took him. I saw something too. Not a person, not exactly a possibility. Myself, standing in a ruined city, flame licking from my fingers, the sky blackened, the codex open and screaming. The people beneath me weren't fighting, they were kneeling. And I was smiling. Smiling like a god. No, I whispered aloud. But the image didn't vanish. It stepped closer. It became me. You've already made the choice, the false Garen said, voice dripping with sorrow. You burn because you like the way it feels. Admit it. That's why they'll follow you. That's why you'll win. Because you'll do what no hero dares, burn everything. I clutched the codex flame tight. You're not me. No, it said, fading. I'm the part you'll need. It vanished, but its words clung to my ribs like ash. Hours passed. The climb steepened. And then we saw it, the Burning Gate. A massive arch hewn from obsidian and scorched brass, rising from the mountainside like the ribcage of some divine beast. It radiated heat, but not the kind that warmed skin. This was soul fire, the burning of identity, of falsehood, of everything unworthy. Marek had warned me it would test more than strength. It would ask for truth. Kale stopped beside me, his face drawn. You sure you want to go through that? No, I admitted. But I will. He nodded. If you don't come out, I'll kill everything that tries to follow you. It was as close to affection as Kale got. I stepped through. Immediately, the world vanished. I stood in a space of white fire and black glass, no walls, no sky, just a voice, deep and endless. It wasn't the sovereign. It wasn't the codex. It was the mountain itself. Who are you? I answered without hesitation. Garen, flame bearer, sworn to the pact, enemy of the hollow sovereign. No. The voice thundered. My vision split. I saw flashes of every name I'd been called: child, coward, brother, killer. I felt the hands of the dead gripping my ankles. I saw my father's eyes, disappointed and proud all at once. I saw the cities I'd failed to save. Who are you without the flame? I faltered. Because I didn't know. Everything I had become was built on fire, fighting it, wielding it, surviving it. If it was gone, what would remain? But then I saw something else. Ceres's laughter. Ira's quiet strength. Kale's stubborn loyalty. The way the Iron Risen looked at me, not with awe, but belief. Not because of what I could burn, but because of what I refused to. I clenched my fists. I'm Garen. Just Garen. A man who refuses to become what the world wants me to be. A man who burns for others, not for power. That's enough. Silence. Then the fire parted. I stood alone before a pedestal, and on it lay a blade half forged from light, half from shadow. The codex flame hovered above it, trembling. I reached forward, heart pounding. And as my hand closed over the hilt, everything merged. The blade and codex became one. The flame entered my chest like a sun reborn. I screamed, not from pain, but from clarity. The gate exploded behind me, and I stepped out into the real world once more, my body surrounded by pulsing fire, the blade now strapped to my back, humming with silent fury. Kale stared. You lived. Barely, I said. The iron risen knelt. The codex sang. And above us, the sigil in the sky began to change, no longer a warning, but a challenge. The sovereign knew I had passed the test. Now it was his turn to burn. We left the god spine behind as ash-streaked winds howled through the peaks, carrying the scent of old fire and unsettled gods. The land beyond was a grave, a vast expanse of blackened stone and scorched earth known only as the Hollow March. No cities remained, no trees or rivers or signs of life, only the broken remnants of what had once been a kingdom. The Hollow Sovereign had wiped this place clean during his ascension, not out of strategy, but out of rage. His wrath had not simply destroyed, it had unmade. And now we had to cross it. The fused codex blade on my back pulsed like a heartbeat. It was more than a weapon, it was a memory given form, a shard of ancient will wrapped in flame. When I held it, I could feel the minds of those who had once stood where I stood, kings who fell to darkness, heroes who burned too brightly, soldiers who died without names. All of them whispering the same truth: I would not leave the Hollow March unchanged. The Iron Risen walked behind me in unshakable formation. Their numbers had dwindled, 7 remained now, their glowing eyes dimmer than before, their armor singed and patched from battles both physical and spiritual. Kale remained at my side, silent but watchful, and though he had no embercore, the fire in his gaze had never burned hotter. Whatever doubts he had once harbored, they were gone now. He was here for the end. We marched without speaking. Words were useless here. The land twisted around us. Shapes in the distance shifted when we looked too long. Mountains bled downward like candle wax. The sky above was neither day nor night, but some endless dusk veined with crimson and black lightning that struck the ground and didn't stop burning. We passed through the skeletal remains of war titans, machines once powered by ember and madness, now hollowed out and rusted, their limbs tangled like corpses mid-prayer. But the worst was what walked beneath. They didn't come all at once. First, we heard the sound, deep rumbling beneath our feet, like something vast turning in its sleep. Then came the tremors, the bursts of black soil erupting like geysers. And then we saw them. They were not hollow. Not exactly. They were older. Creatures of the deep forgotten age, beasts that had slumbered beneath the world before the pact, before the sovereign, before flame. Long-bodied things with too many limbs, skin like armored rock, mouths that didn't open but peeled. They crawled through the wastes like blind gods, drawn to us not by scent or heat, but by purpose. As if they sensed that something in my presence challenged the world they'd been born to outlive. We fought. The first one tore through 2 Iron Risen before I could blink. I leapt, driving the codex blade into its flank, only to watch the wound seal with ash. Kale hurled himself atop its spine, driving his war axe down again and again, grunting curses as sparks flew. The creature screeched not in pain, but in warning. More erupted from the ground. I drew in breath and let the codex guide me. The blade lit up like a solar flare, and I moved not as a warrior, but as something between fire and thought. My strikes weren't physical, they remembered the wound they were meant to make, and so they happened. Every cut became history. Every impact carved truth into flesh. One by one, the creatures fell, but not before they left a mark. 2 more Iron Risen perished, melted into slag under acidic limbs. The rest barely stood. Kale was bloodied, breathing hard, his left arm dangling uselessly. I reached for him, but he waved me off. "Don't stop," he growled. "Not now. Don't you dare stop." I nodded. Then we moved. The beasts didn't return. Whatever governed them had pulled them back, or perhaps it had learned enough. We crossed the final stretch of the Hollow March by nightfall. In the distance, rising from a chasm torn straight into the world's crust, was the Sovereign's fortress, the throne of silence. It wasn't a palace. It wasn't even a building. It was a wound, a spiraling descent of stone and flame and screaming geometry where nothing held shape for long. Towers melted into spires, spires folded into arches, and arches collapsed into shadow. The throne sat at the very center, suspended above the abyss by chains made of light and bone. It was there that the sovereign waited. but between us and him one last army stirred. From the chasm they rose thousands of hollow, clad in fractured armor and wielding blades that hummed with stolen will. Their bodies were wrong, bent, stretched, pieces of former selves jammed together by the sovereign's will. They saw us. They howled. And they marched. Kale looked at me. Any clever plans? Just one, I said, drawing the blade and igniting the codex again. We don't stop. He smirked. That's the dumbest plan I've ever heard. Then it's perfect. We raised our weapons. The hollow march began, and the sovereign's voice echoed faintly across the wastes. Come and burn, little flame. They say death has a smell. They're wrong. It has a sound, a stillness so total that even your own heartbeat seems like a trespass. That was what greeted us at the edge of the throne of silence. No wind, no echo, no breath, just the trembling air of a place where meaning had collapsed under its own weight. The hollow army stood like statues between us and the spiraling descent. Thousands of them, some tall as trees, others crawling and skittering like centipedes carved from regret. But they didn't move, not yet. They watched, as if waiting for something. Then the sky cracked open. A rift of black flame split the clouds above, and from within, a shape unfurled, wings made of ruin, a body stitched from blades and robes of midnight, a face made of every enemy I'd ever slain. The hollow sovereign stepped into view, suspended high above his throne, and he laughed. Not a cruel laugh, not even mocking. It was the laugh of a god who thought the game had already been won. So this is what the fire sent me? His voice boomed across the chasm, distorting thought. A boy who plays at war, a soldier of broken packs. Come then, show me how brightly you burn before I extinguish you forever. The hollow surged forward. We didn't charge, we fell into them. Kale roared beside me, his war axe cleaving in wide arcs as iron risen detonated themselves into the first ranks of the enemy. I moved like the blade itself, no longer striking but rewriting. Every swing of the codex blade unraveled reality around my enemies, turning them to ash mid-motion, severing not their flesh, but their connection to the sovereign's will. But they kept coming. We fought up stairs that had no tops, through corridors that bled oil, past statues that whispered our names backward. Inside the throne, time writhed like a wounded serpent. I saw echoes of myself flickering along the walls, versions of me that had made different choices. A Garen who had abandoned Ceres. One who had embraced the Codex fully and become flame incarnate. One who had died before the journey began. And in the center of it all, the sovereign waited. We breached the inner sanctum, battered and bloodied. Only 3 iron risen remained, their cores flickering. Kale dragged his broken arm behind him, his breath ragged, but he never let go of his axe. The sovereign stood upon his throne, not seated, but floating above it. He was both man and monument, his limbs etched with moving scripture, his eyes 2 black stars. Behind him loomed a colossal wheel of bone and fire, turning impossibly slow, emitting a hum that made the walls cry blood. I stepped forward, the codex blade humming in my hand. This ends now. Yes, the sovereign said, but not the way you think. With a gesture, he stripped the codex from me. It flew from my grasp like a stolen thought, spinning toward the throne. But it didn't fall. It hovered, torn between my will and his. You never understood, he said, stepping closer. You think the codex is a weapon, a tool of rebellion, but it's a seed, and seeds must be buried before they can grow. He raised a hand, and pain lanced through me. My mind flooded with visions of the world as he saw it. A broken loop of suffering, repeating across ages. Kings rising and falling, fire and ash, hope and ruin, over and over again. I am the end of that loop, he whispered. I bring silence, peace, a world where no one can burn, because no one feels. I fell to my knees, the weight of his truth crushing down. But then I felt it, Kale's hand on my shoulder. Not lifting me, just being there, unmoving, solid. I looked up, and I remembered Ceres's fury, Ira's laughter, the iron risen's unwavering steps. I remembered why we fought, not for a perfect world, but for the right to choose an imperfect one. I rose, And the codex responded. The blade shot back to me, flaring to life with a scream. Not a scream of pain, but of defiance. The sovereign recoiled, eyes widening. Impossible, he hissed. No, I said. Human. We clashed. Flame and silence collided, warping the throne room into a storm of memories. Every strike echoed across time. I saw cities crumble. I saw futures bloom. I saw the sovereign, not as a god, but as a man once afraid, once desperate, who had burned the world to make it quiet. But it was not his world anymore. With one final strike, I drove the codex blade through his chest. He screamed, not in rage, but in relief, as if I had finally given him what he had always wanted. He disintegrated into light and dust. The throne cracked, the wheel of bone shattered. The hollow army froze across the land and crumbled into ash. Kale dropped to his knees. Tell me it's over. I looked at the blade in my hand, and for the first time it was silent. We stood among ruins that defied architecture, twisted pillars that dissolved when touched, stairways leading to fractured skies, shattered gates holding back nothing at all. The throne of silence, once an impossible monument to despair, was now collapsing upon itself, folding inward like a dying star. All around us, the hollow army disintegrated, their armor rusting midair, their bodies unraveling into threads of ash that danced like snowflakes before vanishing completely. The silence that followed was not dreadful, it was peaceful. For the first time since this began, the world breathed. Kale sat with his back against a wall of obsidian, his chest rising and falling in slow, painful rhythm. His face was pale, but there was a strange contentment in his eyes, as though he'd made peace with everything. So, is this what winning feels like? He muttered, his lips cracked, his voice dry as sand. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. The codex blade still burned faintly in my hand, its light dimmed but not gone. It pulsed like a dying star, as if unsure whether its purpose had been fulfilled or simply transformed. I could still feel the sovereign's touch lingering on the hilt like smoke on steel. His final expression haunted me, not hatred, not fear, but release. He had wanted to be stopped. Maybe he'd always wanted it. I turned toward the remains of the throne. What had once been a hovering wheel of bone and flame was now a crater of black glass, its edges glowing red as if the world had been cauterized there. And at the center, something flickered. A spark. I stepped toward it, ignoring the warning screaming in the back of my mind. The spark hovered like a heart without a body, pulsating slowly. It wasn't fire. It wasn't light. It was possibility. Memory. Legacy. The seed, as the sovereign had called it. The codex in my hand responded. Not with hunger. With recognition. I knelt, holding the blade out, and the spark drifted into it. The codex didn't flare. It didn't ignite. It simply absorbed the light and then fell silent in my grip, heavier than before, like it now carried more than just power. Kale watched from a distance, his good arm resting on one bent knee. Is it done? He asked. I shook my head. It's never done. But the war is over. We left the throne of silence behind us. It collapsed quietly, a ripple of dust and light fading into the hollow march. As we stepped back into the scarred earth, the skies above began to shift. The eternal dusk began to break, just a little, as the first rays of dawn spilled through clouds that had not parted in decades. I looked up. Blue sky. Just a sliver. But it was enough. The Iron Risen walked behind us, only three now, their bodies battered, their movements slower, but still marching. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence of victory said everything we could never find words for. We returned to the edge of the god spine as the sun finally rose, casting the mountains in a gold they hadn't worn in a generation. We found others there. Scattered bands of survivors. Villagers. Old warbands. Emberborn. Some looked on us with awe. Others with suspicion. A few with tears in their eyes. They'd felt the sovereign's death as a tremor through the world, and they had come to see what remained. Kale addressed them simply. The tyrant is dead. The flame is free. You can go home now if you remember where it is. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some wept. Others fell to their knees. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of ending. It wasn't celebration, it was relief. Later, when the sun was high, Kale sat beside me atop a blackened ridge, chewing a dried root and watching the people begin to rebuild. Fires were lit not for war, but for warmth. Tents were raised. The first structures began to form. Somewhere below, children laughed for the first time in my memory. Are you going to keep it? He asked. I looked down at the codex blade resting across my lap. I don't know. It's not just a weapon anymore. You could destroy it. I could, I said. But maybe it's not meant to be destroyed. Kale snorted. Typical chosen one logic. I smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe I just want to believe that some legacies don't have to end in fire. We sat there for a long time. And as the sun climbed higher and the winds carried warmth instead of ash, I felt something strange begin to stir inside me. Hope. The world doesn't end with a roar, it ends with a whisper. And after the whisper, there's a choice. I didn't expect to carry the Codex blade back to the living. I thought it would dissolve with the sovereign's death or be consumed by some divine reckoning. But here it remained unchanged in form, yet heavier than ever. Not in weight, but in presence. People could feel it when I passed. Some turned their eyes away. Others bowed. A few reached out, not to me, but to the blade, as if it were a relic of the gods. That frightened me more than any hollow ever had. We made camp in the high valleys of Nerith's spine, where the rivers had begun to thaw and the frost no longer bit like hatred. Word of the hollow sovereign's fall had spread like wind-blown fire. Messengers came from distant settlements, from the ashes of the ember bastions, from scattered outposts and silent fortresses. They came not to fight, but to ask what came next. I didn't have answers, but they called for a conclave anyway. Kale hated the idea, of course. It's a bloody war council dressed up as a peace banquet, he muttered, spitting into the fire one evening. They'll smile and toast, and behind their teeth they're carving up what's left of the world. He wasn't wrong. By the third day, tents of silk and bone rose around our makeshift village. Banners flew again, each stitched with old sigils from before the Hollow Wars. There was pride in their arrival, but also old grudges. We torn down the enemy of all men, but not the mistrust that had always lived beneath our skin. They gathered in the central pavilion, a ring of stone and timber beneath a sky that refused to decide between storm and sunlight. Leaders, generals, survivors. I recognized a few, Lady Vorin of the Silent East with her blood-red tattoos and frost-touched glaive. Elder John of the Cracked Veil, a man whose words were slower than mountains. And unexpectedly Saris. She strode into camp as if summoned by the Codex itself, dressed in leather's scorched black, her sword sheathed but always within reach. Her eyes found mine through the crowd and she gave me the smallest nod. She wasn't here to celebrate. She was here to witness. The talks began, but they weren't about rebuilding. They were about the blade. Some wanted it sealed away. Others wanted it displayed as a symbol of victory. A few too many wanted it used. We could unite the fractured lands under one banner, Lady Vorin said, her voice like steel on ice. No more fractured kingdoms. One world. One flame. And who decides who wields it? Saris countered, her voice low but cutting. You. Elder Jom sighed. The boy is not a god. Let him live. I'm not a boy, I said, louder than I meant to. And the Codex isn't a symbol. It's a burden. It doesn't want to lead. It wants to consume. They all turned to me. Not just the council. Everyone. The camp had gone silent. I stood. This blade was never meant for thrones. Or temples. It was forged in desperation and carried through death. It burns not for glory, but because the world gave it no other choice. You want to shape the world with fire? Then understand you're shaping it in my shadow. And I won't let it happen. The Codex blade flared in my hand softly like a memory. And then, I laid it down on the stone. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Even Kale tensed. But I stepped back. If it truly belongs to the world, then let the world decide what to do with it. Not through war. Not through threats. But together. I walked away, leaving the blade behind me. That night, I sat with Saris beneath the stars, watching the light flicker across the valley below. The Codex hadn't been touched. No one dared. You did the right thing, she said after a long silence. Did I? I whispered. She looked at me, her eyes softer than I remembered. You chose. That's all we've ever fought for. The right to choose. Kale joined us soon after, grumbling about frost and politics, but offering me a drink without a word. We sat like that, just the three of us, while the world decided whether it would burn again or finally begin to heal. And for the first time, I believed healing was possible. We thought laying down the blade would be the end of it, that the fire, now dormant, could finally rest. But fire doesn't rest. It waits. And so do those who crave it. The Codex blade remained untouched in the stone ring where I left it, yet its presence seeped into the ground, into the air, into the thoughts of everyone who dared walk near. Some couldn't even look at it. Others stared too long. But no one picked it up. Not yet. We stayed in the high valleys longer than we should have. Rebuilding began quickly, reforged alliances, new paths cut through mountains where hollow corruption had once twisted the land. People planted again. Children played again. Songs returned. But beneath it all, a tremor stirred. Not of war, of uncertainty. The hollow were gone, but the echo of fear remained, and in that echo, ambition began to bloom. Saris was the first to notice. She found the first signs in the southern pass, old sigils scratched into stone in a language that shouldn't exist anymore. Hollow script, but warped, reshaped, like someone had learned it, not inherited it. Someone is trying to mimic their power, she said, handing me a piece of obsidian etched with the same markings. And they're getting too close to the truth. Kale was less subtle. He returned one night from a scouting trip with blood on his gloves and a grim look on his face. Found a fire cult near the western ridges, worshipping the blade like it's some kind of messiah. They had a shrine built from bones and rusted iron. Said the flame would return, guided by a chosen flame bearer. I didn't speak for a long time. I stared into the fire, listening to its crackle, and wondered if this was inevitable. Power, even in peace, draws shadows. And ours had grown long. We decided to leave the valley. Not to flee, but to ensure. We needed to know what was rising from the ashes. Whether it was just desperate faith or something worse. The three of us, me, Saris, and Kale, took only what we needed. No banners. No followers. Just old weapons and older scars. The codex blade remained behind, still buried in stone beneath the open sky. But before we departed, I stood before it one last time, pressing my palm against its hilt. You stay, I whispered. Stay silent. Let the world forget your name. It didn't answer. Our journey took us east first, into the rusting skeletons of cities abandoned during the Hollow Wars. We found traces of gatherings, strange runes burned into soil, and voices preaching fire to broken towns. These weren't armies. Not yet. But they were seeds, and someone was planting them. The trail led deeper into the scorchlands where the sun never fully set and the wind carried ash that didn't belong to any tree. That's where we heard the name, the Ember Saint. Whispers only, fragments, but always spoken with reverence, and always tied to fire. One night, as we camped in a ruined tower beneath a burned-out sky, Saris sat beside me, sharpening her blade with slow, thoughtful strokes. What if this never ends? She asked. What if the fire just keeps finding new fuel? I looked out over the wasteland, watching as the wind stirred ancient dust across the bones of cities. Then we keep walking, I said. Not to carry the fire. To watch it. To make sure it doesn't spread. Kale grunted in approval from his corner, already half asleep with his axe across his chest. Sounds like a bloody retirement plan to me. We all smiled. Just a little. Because despite the growing rumors, despite the uncertainty, despite the embers threatening to spark again, there was still laughter. Still companionship. Still life. And that meant the world was worth protecting, even if it never remembered our names. It started with a voice carried on smoke. Not words. Just cadence, slow, mesmerizing, like an ancient lullaby turned into a sermon. We found the gathering outside the ruins of Velkareth, where jagged bones of blackstone towers reached toward a bruised sky. There were maybe 50 of them, kneeling in concentric rings around a flame that burned blue, unnatural, silent. No wood. No smoke, just fire floating above a carved altar. And at the center stood a man cloaked in flame-colored robes, arms raised as if to embrace the entire world. The Ember Saint. He didn't look like a warrior. His face was too smooth, too calm. No scars, no calluses. But his eyes held the storm. Not wild, not mad, but sharp, calculated, convincing. He spoke not of destruction, but of renewal. The fire does not devour, he said, it reveals. Beneath the ash lies purity. We do not burn to conquer. We burn to cleanse. The people around him wept. Some whispered prayers. Others offered small tokens, bone necklaces, scorched coins, bits of armor. Relics of the old world surrendered in faith to build a new one. I saw the glint of desperation in their eyes. The hollow were gone, but their scars hadn't faded. And in their hunger for safety, they turned to anything that promised light. We watched from the cliffs above, cloaked in dust and shadow. Saris lowered her spyglass slowly. He's charismatic, she said. Too polished. That kind of language, it's not new. It's calculated. Kale crossed his arms, scowling. He's dangerous. I nodded. But we can't strike him down. Not like this. Not while he's a symbol. Then what? Saris asked. We wait until he becomes a warlord? I didn't answer right away. I was staring at the flame, the unnatural blue fire that didn't consume. It was familiar. Too familiar. Not Codex fire, but echoes of it. Like someone had tried to imitate the flame's power. Badly. Or maybe partially. He's been near the Codex, I said at last. Or something connected to it. That night, we infiltrated their camp. We didn't strike. We listened. We moved through shadows, heard their chants, their stories. How the Ember Saint had come from the eastern storms, walking barefoot through ash. How he had turned hollow beasts to cinders with a word. How he promised that a new flame would rise greater than the Codex, pure and eternal, wielded not by one, but by the worthy many. But we also heard the darker rumors, whispers of trials by fire, of dissenters burned in silent pyres, of villages that refused his creed and were never heard from again. He preached peace, but he practiced cleansing. On the third night, I met him. He came to our fire without fear, flanked by two cloaked figures whose eyes glowed faintly in the dark. He wore no armor, just robes stitched with flame motifs and an amulet made of scorched stone. He looked at me and smiled as if we were old friends. "Garen," he said, "bearer of the last flame, I've waited to meet you." I stood, my hand near my sword, but not on it. "You know who I am." "Of course. You ended the Hollow Sovereign. You broke the throne. You laid the Codex to rest. I didn't bury it for someone else to dig up." His smile didn't falter. "I don't want the Codex. I want what comes after it. You were the fire that ended the dark. I am the fire that lights the future." "You're preaching false flame," I said coldly. "You're twisting something sacred. I'm evolving it." He took a step closer, his voice quiet now, intimate. "The Codex was a weapon. I'm offering a path. You fought for peace. I'm offering permanence. Join me and we can shape this world, not with fear, but with faith." I didn't respond. I turned and walked away, but his voice followed. "When the world burns again, remember you left the match untouched." The next morning, his camp was gone. No footprints, no embers, just scorched earth and ash patterns spiraling outward like a warning. The Ember Saint had vanished, but his message remained, spreading through desperate towns like wildfire. And for the first time since the Codex was laid to rest, I feared it might have to rise again. The fires didn't spread like war, they spread like rot. Quiet, patient, settling in the cracks of civilization where no banners flew and no laws stood. Villages that had survived the Hollow Wars now fell not to blades or beasts, but to sermons. The Ember Saint's name became a murmur on every wind trail, whispered by those who had seen his flame and walked away changed. Not visibly, but in their eyes. In the way they spoke of him not as a man, but a truth. We moved fast, tracing the ripple of his influence through the broken spine of the world. In the scorched canyons of Varithkor, we found a hidden chapel carved into the rock, lit with braziers of that same unnatural blue fire. The walls bore frescoes of the saint's face, not painted, but burned into the stone. In a clearing near Black Glass Lake, we passed a circle of stone pillars inscribed with his doctrine, each surrounded by kneeling figures who hadn't eaten in days but claimed they were filled with flame. Kale wanted to pull them up, shake the madness out of their bones, but I stopped him. You can't tear belief out of someone's soul. Not like that. We began to hear a new word passed along with the Ember Saint's name, Ashbound. They weren't just followers. They were enforcers. Nomads dressed in soot-gray armor and veiled masks, moving in twos and threes across the land, preaching purification and punishing heresy. We crossed paths with one pair outside the ruins of Old Caradon. They stood beside a pyre still smoking, where a family had been burned for refusing to convert. Sarah slit one's throat before he could even speak. The other tried to run. Kale put an axe between his ribs. There was no satisfaction in the kill. Only silence. That night, we camped beneath a broken sky bridge, the stars fractured by drifting ash clouds. I couldn't sleep. My mind circled a question that had haunted me since the saint's visit. What if he wasn't the origin? What if he was the mouthpiece, not the mind? Saris found me sitting by the dying fire, tossing sparks into the dark with the point of my knife. "He's not leading this," I said, not turning to her. "He's channeling something older." She didn't argue, just handed me a fragment she'd found near one of the altars. A piece of bone, not human. Twisted, blackened, and carved with symbols I hadn't seen since the Hollow's heart. Not sovereign script. Deeper. Kale joined us later, fresh from scouting. "There's talk in the north," he said. "A ruin uncovered in the Veil of Glass. Locals say it breathes fire at night, and they've seen ashbound caravans heading there. Something's calling them." We didn't wait. We traveled north, across Old Hollow territory where even the grass grew in wrong directions and shadows moved without light. The Veil of Glass was a crater of broken obsidian, reflecting the sky like water. In its center stood an ancient door, half buried, carved from molten stone that had hardened mid-breath. And on it was a symbol I recognized from my dreams, the Eye of Flame. Older than the Codex. Older than the Sovereign. A source. The Ember Saint wasn't their leader. He was their prophet. And whatever lay beneath that door, it was waking up. The door wasn't just a barrier, it was a threshold. Standing before it felt like standing on the edge of a scream buried for centuries. The stone, though scorched and silent, pulsed faintly beneath my hand as if remembering every soul that had once passed through. And it was warm. Not burning, not even hot, but alive. Sarah circled the edges, studying the strange molten glyphs etched in spirals around the frame. This wasn't built by human hands, she whispered. Or if it was, they weren't human anymore. Kale planted his axe into the dirt and spat. So we open it, or what? I stared at the center symbol, the Eye of Flame. It had haunted my dreams since the codex was buried, always watching from the dark. The flame behind the flame. Slowly, I reached into my pack and pulled out the old codex shard I'd kept, a piece of the blade that had broken during the final battle with the Hollow Sovereign. It hummed faintly in my grip, drawn to the door like a key to a lock made of memory and fire. The door responded with a groan that echoed through the earth. The glyphs flared dimly, then faded. Stone grated against stone. The doorway unsealed. Beyond it stretched a stairwell spiraling downward into the obsidian belly of the world, lit not by torches but by threads of molten fire running through the very veins of the walls. We descended, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The deeper we went, the more wrong it felt. Not hostile, just vast, ancient, unknowable. Like entering the lungs of a sleeping god. At the bottom was a chamber too large for reason. A dome carved from black glass and bone, filled with colossal anvils and forge altars long gone cold. But at the center was what held us breathless, a pit of fire. Not blue, not gold, not red, colorless. A flame that gave no light, no warmth, but burned all the same. Around it hovered fragments, bones, ash, weapons, echoes of screams. The first flame. This was where it had begun. Not the codex, not the sovereign. This was the source. The forge that birthed both salvation and ruin. I stepped closer and felt it instantly, voices pressing into my skull, memories not my own, lifetimes of pain and triumph braided into the fire's whisper. I saw a vision, an ancient people, desperate, sacrificing themselves to a primordial blaze in hopes of power. And they received it, but not as they intended. They became the first hollow. They didn't create the flame. They unleashed it. Saris clutched her head and fell to her knees. Kale bellowed something I couldn't hear over the rushing pressure inside my skull. And then I saw him. The Ember Saint, standing just beyond the flame, untouched, hands outstretched. You've seen it, he said softly. Now you understand. The codex was only the blade. But this is the furnace. And I am the bellows. I reached for my sword, but I couldn't move. The flame held me. Not physically, but in memory. It flooded me with every burn I'd ever suffered, every time I'd lit a torch, every moment I'd survived because of fire. It made me remember. And in that remembering, it tried to bind me. But I fought it. With all I had. With pain. With defiance. With everything I wasn't willing to become. The vision broke. I gasped for air and stumbled back. Saris was already on her feet, blade drawn, blood dripping from her nose. Kale roared and charged at the saint, but the man disappeared into smoke, leaving only laughter in his wake. We fled the forge, hearts pounding, knowing what we had just awakened wasn't a man. It wasn't even a god. It was a truth. The fire wasn't a tool. It was a hunger. And now that we had opened its eye, it wouldn't close again. The moment we emerged from the forge beneath the veil of glass, the world already felt changed. Not by time, not by distance, but by memory. The air was thicker, laced with the scent of scorched iron and something older, something primal. It was as though the land itself had inhaled what we'd awakened and now exhaled it in tremors and whispers. That colorless flame we had witnessed, it hadn't stayed buried. It had spread. Not in physical fire, not yet, but in presence. We felt it in every shadow cast by the sun, in every sudden chill beside a campfire, in the way the birds no longer sang in the morning. We moved quickly, traveling west through the red dunes of Velmari Reach, where sandstorms now burned hotter than ever before. Villages were empty, not destroyed, just abandoned, their walls charred from within, as if the flame had grown sentient and wandered through. We passed through the husk of a temple that had been turned into an altar for the ashbound, words scrawled in soot across the walls, "The fire remembers who lit it first." That line stuck with me. It clung like a guilt I hadn't earned but carried all the same. Everywhere we went, we saw the signs, followers wearing ember-painted skin, children chanting the saint's name in feverish tones, even scholars who once warned of ancient powers now declaring the first flame a divine cycle. And in the city still resisting, we heard new rumors of statues crying fire, of people combusting in their sleep, of dreams shared across continents where the Eye of Flame opened and stared through them. But worst of all were the echoes. They appeared without pattern, without warning. Flickers of the past made manifest, replaying in bursts of fire and memory. We stood atop a mountain pass when the first struck. The sky darkened without clouds, and suddenly we weren't alone. Dozens, no, hundreds of hollow soldiers marched across the ridge, their eyes alight with white fire, weapons raised. Except they weren't real. They were echoes, walking memories. Their feet left no print, but their war cries filled our ears like thunder. They passed through us like smoke, but their presence chilled our bones. They're not visions, Saris murmured, jaw tight. They're imprints. That fire down there, it's remembering. Kale cursed under his breath. It's not just showing the past. It's learning from it. And I knew he was right. Whatever had slept in that forge, it was never meant to stay forgotten. It was a sentient fire, not alive in the way we understood, but aware. Ancient. Hungry. And now that it had been stirred, it reached out not just to burn, but to reclaim. We sought shelter in the city of Anoran, one of the last great bastions of resistance. The walls were manned, the towers lit with silver beacons designed to ward off the ash-bound. Inside, scholars worked day and night, searching texts older than any kingdom, hoping for something, anything that could explain the first flame. They found fragments, a civilization before history consumed by their attempt to weaponize fire, whispers of a being they called Evardar, the thought of flame, and a warning repeated over and over, do not awaken the hunger that sleeps in light. Too late. I was summoned before the Council of Ashgard, the leaders of Andoran's defense. They demanded answers. What had we found? What had we unleashed? I told them everything. I didn't soften the truth. I told them that the Ember Saint was only a vessel, that the first flame was awake, that the world itself had become a tinderbox and belief was the matchstick. Their faces were grave but not surprised. One of them, an old woman named Vera, leaned forward and asked the question that mattered most. Can it be stopped? I didn't have an answer. That night, as I stood on the walls and watched firelight flicker unnaturally on the horizon, I heard a voice again. Not in my ears. In my blood. I remember you, Garen. You were fire before you carried flame. You burned even before you were born. Come. Let me show you what you truly are. And I realized then the flame wasn't just remembering the world. It was remembering me. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, but because every time I closed my eyes, I was somewhere else. Somewhere deep, beneath stone and time. Beneath the memory of what this world used to be. I stood in halls of flickering obsidian, surrounded by silhouettes made of fire and ash, faces half-formed, hands reaching toward me not in threat, but in recognition. They murmured my name, not just Garen, but Garanir, Garethil, Ashchild, names layered on my soul like sediment. Each time I tried to speak, flames leapt from my mouth, and the figures bowed. When I awoke, I was already standing, fully clothed, fingers blistered, but unburnt. There was soot beneath my nails. Saris noticed first. She stepped toward me slowly, her voice low. Something's different. It's him, Kale growled. He's carrying more than the saint's attention now. No, it was deeper than that. The flame hadn't touched me. It had claimed me, not as a pawn, not as a prophet, as kin. I didn't know how or why, but it had seen something in me, or perhaps remembered something through me. I looked down at my hands, and for a flicker, I saw them not as flesh, but as light caught in bone. My reflection in a water basin shimmered, and behind my eyes, for just an instant, burned the eye of flame. We gathered our weapons and rode out from Anoran the next dawn, cutting across the weeping wastes, where geysers of ash and fire now ruptured from beneath the earth. The world was shifting. Trees had begun to burn from the inside out, not consumed, just alight. Immortal and dying all at once. Birds circled in strange patterns above us, and in the distance, mountains cracked like they were breathing. The Ember Saint was heading east, to the Plateau of Sundering, an ancient fault line where the ley lines of old magic intersected. It was there he would light the flame's rebirth, a ritual not to destroy the world, but to remake it in fire's image. We had to stop him, but I also knew something else now. I wasn't just a soldier in this war. I was a product of it. Saris pressed me for answers as we camped beneath firelit clouds. I tried to explain what I'd seen, visions of fire-chosen champions across eons, each one rising, burning, falling, a cycle, a forge, and in each a spark that looked like me, not physically but spiritually. You think you're one of them? She asked, her tone unreadable. No, I said. I think I always was. I just didn't remember until the flame did. Kale didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, are you still you, Garen? That was the question, wasn't it? We entered the ruins of an old observatory near the Sundering and discovered carvings that confirmed what I feared. Long before the Codex, long before the Hollow, there had been an order known only as the Flameborn, vessels of the prime fire, not gods, not demons, just mortals who had been altered, remade by the hunger they sought to wield. Most were consumed. One survived. The oldest name on the wall, Garanir the First Tempered. My name. It didn't matter what I believed anymore. I was a Flameborn, but I wasn't the Ember Saint, and I would never let the fire finish what it started. The next day, we saw the flames rising over the plateau, towers of light, unnatural, churning the sky into a spiral of glowing smoke. The ritual had begun, and I felt the fire in my blood answering it. The sky wasn't supposed to look like that. No stars, no sun, only a great spiraling wound of fire above the plateau of Sundering. It churned like a storm, yet there was no wind. No heat touched our skin, and yet everything felt like it was burning. The world had gone quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of breath held before a scream, of stillness before collapse. We stood at the base of the rise, looking up at the black stone steps that led to the summit where the Ember Saint had begun his ritual. Pillars of molten light pulsed from the altar circle, feeding the storm above. And in the middle of it all, he stood, his arms raised, his eyes consumed by the flame, his voice chanting in a language that tasted like ash on my tongue even from here. Saris placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. This is it, she said. The moment. Kale adjusted the grip on his axe. You sure you're still with us, Garen? I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know. The fire inside me wasn't sleeping anymore. It surged with every heartbeat, whispering promises, memories, warnings. I could feel the steps before me like an extension of my own spine. I could hear the saint's voice as though it were inside my ribs. The flame wanted me to walk forward, to join him, to finish what had begun so long ago. But I wasn't going to let that voice speak for me. I'm with you, I said, but I don't think I'm the same man who entered that forge. We climbed together. The ascent wasn't just physical, it was mental, spiritual. Each step weighed heavier than the last. I felt the memories of the flame pressing harder now, forcing visions into my head, kingdoms falling in fire, lovers turned to cinders in my arms, a crown of light upon my head as I stood above a world kneeling in embers. This could be you, the voice said. This is you. No, I whispered. It was. But it won't be. When we reached the summit, the altar pulsed like a heart. The Ember Saint stood within a circle of runes etched in obsidian, his skin now laced with glowing lines of fire. His voice was inhuman, resonating across the rocks, the sky, us. He turned as we approached, his eyes blazing like dying suns. You came, he said, with something that almost resembled pride. The flame remembers you, Garen. As do I. I'm not here to remember, I said, stepping forward. I'm here to stop you. He smiled. But you are the ending and the beginning. I only carry the fire. You are the fire. Flame burst around us in a perfect circle, cutting Kale and Saris off from me. I stepped inside alone into the ring of memory. The heat was unbearable, but it didn't burn me. Not anymore. It recognized me, and that terrified me more than pain ever could. The saint raised his hand and the altar surged. Let me show you what we were, he said. And suddenly I saw our past lives as flame-born, burning cities not out of hate, but belief. We were saviors, we thought. We were cleansing the world, and I had led them. I had spoken the first chant, had carved the first flame sigil into the earth. The saint had once followed me. I staggered. I was wrong, yes, he said gently, but we don't have to be again. He reached out his hand. Come, Garen, reclaim what was ours. And for a moment, I wanted to. Gods, I wanted to. But I saw Saris through the flame, her eyes locked on mine. Kale shouting something, trying to break through the firewall. And I remembered who I had become, who I had fought for, what I had chosen. No, I said, the fire may remember, but I don't belong to it anymore. I raised my blade not with rage, but with resolve. The saint's expression twisted, not in anger, but sorrow. Then you will burn alone. We clashed, not with blades at first, but with flame, memory, light. Our past selves collided behind us in echoes, burning across the summit like ghostly titans. The altar cracked, the storm above shrieked, and every time his fire struck mine, I pushed it back, not with strength, but will. I wasn't fighting to reclaim power. I was fighting to choose who I wanted to be. Our swords met at last, and the sound was like stone breaking. Sparks flew. Ash scattered. And when we parted, the saint staggered, wounded not by steel, but by the truth he had forgotten. You remember now, he whispered. Don't you? I do, I said. And I choose to end it. With one final strike, I shattered the runes beneath us. The ritual faltered. The fire screamed. And the plateau began to crack. The plateau broke beneath us like a frozen sea shattered by thunder. Cracks spiderwebbed across the obsidian, light poured out of them, not golden, not warm, but raw, white fire, the kind that didn't burn skin, but burned existence. The runes around the altar collapsed in on themselves, their ancient structure undone by my strike, and with them the ritual began to unravel. The great flame vortex in the sky screamed, folding inward like a wounded god, and the pressure of it all hit my chest like a hammer. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could feel was memory tearing through me like knives. The Ember Saint fell to his knees, clutching his chest as flames licked up his arms and spine. His eyes, once so full of apocalyptic certainty, were wide with something close to fear. You've doomed us both, he rasped. You've severed the tether, the flame has no anchor now. I stepped toward him as the ground shook beneath my boots. No anchor means no master. Let it go. You don't understand, he said, voice trembling. It won't fade. It'll scatter. It'll hunt for minds, for bodies. You haven't ended the fire. You freed it. Then the floor split and the altar dropped into a chasm of light. I lunged, grabbing the saint by the arm, but he yanked away, stumbling back. I remember now, he whispered, more to himself than me. We were gods once, and we broke everything. The fire consumed him, not as punishment, but as return. He didn't scream. He smiled. And then he was gone, devoured in a column of light that rocketed into the vortex above and tore a ragged hole in the sky. I was thrown back by the force. My body hit the stone and rolled toward the edge of the plateau where Kale and Saris were trying to push through the still raging wall of flame. Garen. Sarah screamed, her face half-lit by the chaos. The edge crumbled. I reached out and caught a broken ridge just in time, my other hand clutching the hilt of my blade. My fingers burned from the heat, from the strain, from the truth. Because the Ember Saint was right about one thing, I hadn't destroyed the flame. I had unbound it. All of it. The storm above didn't vanish. It imploded, sending out a shockwave of searing wind that swept over the land. I heard mountains cracking in the distance. Valleys boiling. The ley lines screamed beneath the soil. What I had broken on the summit was more than a ritual. It was a seal. Kale roared and broke through the flame barrier with his axe, carving a path wide enough for Saris to leap through. Together, they dragged me up as the stone fell away beneath us, collapsing into the glowing abyss. We ran, no plan, no destination, just away. The plateau folded behind us like paper in fire. And as we descended the scorched cliffs to the valley below, I looked back one last time. The altar was gone. The saint was gone. But above, the sky remained open. Not torn awake. We reached shelter hours later, somewhere among the blighted ridges east of the Sundering. Ash fell like snow. Trees smoldered quietly, not consumed, just waiting. Everything was quiet again. Not peaceful. Not yet, but quiet. Sarah sat beside me, her expression unreadable. Is it over? I shook my head. No, it's just begun. The flame is free now. But so am I. Kale grunted from the other side of the fire. So what? The world burns slower now? No, I said. The fire scattered. Without a master, it's searching. Choosing. Not everyone will be consumed. But those who want the fire, those who call to it, they'll find it. Saris frowned. And what about you? I looked into the flames of our small campfire and, for the first time, it didn't look hungry. It looked calm. I remember who I was. What I did. But I'm not him anymore. I carry the fire, yes, but I choose what to do with it. In the distance, we saw a flare of light streak across the horizon. Another awakening. Another echo. Maybe someone else, somewhere, was making the same choice I just had. Or maybe not. Either way, the flame was loose. And I was still standing. We traveled east with the rising smoke at our backs and the horizon painted in strange new hues, where once the sky bled orange only at dusk, now it shimmered with veins of ember even at noon. The flame had changed the world, not in a single blaze, but in flickers scattered like seeds on the wind. And those seeds had started to take root. Villages abandoned overnight. Forests where the animals no longer fled from fire, but bowed to it. Mountains that had begun to hum with heat beneath their crust. And in some places, worse, people who had begun to change. The first one we found was a boy, no more than 12. alone in the ruins of a temple, crouched in a circle of smoldering stone, untouched by the flames licking at the walls around him. His eyes glowed faintly, not bright, not wild like the Ember Saints, but as if some pilot light inside had been lit. He didn't speak. He only looked at me, head tilted, and whispered, "I dreamed of you." Then he held up his hand, and in his palm burned a perfect, silent flame. Saris reached for her blade, but I stopped her. The boy didn't need a weapon. He was one. "We need to keep moving," Kale muttered as we walked away from the temple, the boy watching us until he vanished in the smoke. "They're multiplying. They're awakening," I corrected him. "Just like I did. We found others. A woman who walked barefoot across molten ground without pain. A merchant whose breath came out in sparks, who lit every step of his path unconsciously. An old priest who wrote scriptures in ash that shifted on their own, forming new passages when no one looked. Not all of them were dangerous. Some were frightened. Some grateful. Some silent, their thoughts hidden behind flickering stairs. But then came the first burn. We saw the smoke trail 2 days north where a town called Draven used to stand. What remained was charcoal and ruin. Not just scorched wood or stone, but people frozen in their final moments, faces twisted, bodies blackened yet upright, as if the fire had taken them in an instant of judgment. And at the center, kneeling in the middle of the town square, was a man with a crown of flame fused into his scalp. His hands were stretched to the sky, his skin cracked and glowing like dying coals. He didn't move when we approached. He only whispered through blistered lips, "The fire chose me." Kale had his axe ready, but I stepped forward instead. "What did it ask of you?" He smiled, "A broken thing." "Nothing. That's how I knew I was worthy." And then he burst into flames, not with a scream, but a sigh of relief, and was gone. We left Draven in silence. "What are we going to do?" Saris asked later as we made camp near a canyon rim lit by distant flares. "We can't chase every spark. We can't save them all." I stared into the fire again. It had become a habit, maybe even a compulsion. But this time I didn't feel its pull. I felt its watching. "We're not meant to save them all," I said slowly. "We're meant to choose who we become now. Not everyone will fall to it. But some already have." "And what about you?" Kale asked. "You said the fire's part of you. That you carry it. How long before it decides you belong to it again?" I didn't have an answer, but deep down I felt the truth. The flame no longer wanted to control me. It wanted me to lead, not through domination, through legacy, through example. The saint had tried to become a god through fire. I had become myself by walking through it and coming out the other side. "There will be more," I said. "More like the boy, like the priest. Some will burn cities, some will heal them. But I've seen what happens when fire rules without restraint. We have to find the ones who carry it and teach them not to be consumed." Saris exhaled slowly. "So we become what? Flame shepherds?" "No," I said. "We become reminders. The fire doesn't choose. People do. And it's up to us to show them how." We were 3 days into the scorched hinterlands of Varn when we saw the sky split open for the second time. It wasn't like the sundering this time. There was no vortex, no ritual altar tearing a hole into the stars. Just a vertical line of fire ripping through the clouds like a blade drawn across silk. For a moment, the world went silent. Then, in the space between heartbeats, we felt it, every ember, every dormant spark, every lingering flicker of the flame throughout the world suddenly shivered. As if called. Saris dropped to one knee, clutching her chest. Kale stumbled back, blade half-drawn, his eyes wide. But me? I stood, because I knew what this meant. This was no accident, no stray awakening. This was someone claiming the flame, not to serve it, not to resist it, but to rewrite it. The echo reached me first, carried not by voice but by presence, a wordless beckoning that clawed at the inside of my skull. "Come, see what the flame can become." We tracked the source northeast, through valleys reduced to glass, past rivers that steamed like freshly bled wounds. Survivors along the path spoke of a figure wrapped in fire, not blazing but perfect. Calm, radiant. They said this one didn't burn recklessly, he chose who to scorch. They called him Orin the Bright, and already some whispered his name like a prayer. But I knew him. Not by memory, not by name, but by feeling. He was like me. Or worse, what I could have been if I had embraced the flame not with guilt, but pride. The flame hadn't broken him. It had reflected him. We finally found him atop the ashen cliffs of Derical, standing before a crowd of the newly awakened, dozens, maybe more, some glowing faintly, others already radiating with power. Behind him, a towering sculpture of fire shaped like a tree crackled silently, its branches reaching toward the broken sky. And Orin stood at its roots, welcoming the flameborn with open arms. He turned as we approached, smiling like an old friend. Garen, he said, voice smooth and bright, echoing with layered tones, one human, one not. The saint's flame died with reverence. Yours survived with regret. But me? I'm the flame's evolution. You're not evolution, I said, stepping forward. Your ambition wrapped in fire. And what's wrong with that? He asked, arms wide. We were chosen not to carry the flame, but to guide it. Shape it. You fought to destroy it, the saint fought to preserve it. But I understand it. Kale growled. You understand nothing. You're just another tyrant waiting for your kingdom. But Orin didn't flinch. Tyrants take without giving. I offer the world choice. Join me and become more than what you were. Resist me and burn away the lies you cling to. Either way, you are purified. I stepped closer, my hand tight around my blade. You're playing God. I'm playing fire, he whispered. And fire creates. It forges. You of all people should remember that. Then the ground shook not from violence, but from resonance. Every flame nearby responded to him, rising and dancing, forming sigils in the air. And the awakened behind him followed suit, hands outstretched, whispering his name in a rising chant. He wasn't just a spark anymore. He was becoming a torch. I won't let you twist this, I said, drawing my blade. You don't get to write the flame's future alone. Orin smiled, calm and maddening. Then let's see whose fire burns brighter. And the last battle began. He moved like lightning, his body trailing arcs of molten energy, his strikes painting the air with radiant heat. Kale met him head-on, clashing steel against searing light, his roars lost in the cacophony. Saris vanished into the smoke, her arrows striking the awakened, trying to swarm us, giving me a narrow path forward. I faced Orin at the foot of the fire tree, the embers of the world swirling around us like a storm. This ends now, I said. No, he replied. This begins now. And when our flames collided, his forged in certainty, mind born of reckoning, the world trembled. But it didn't break. Not yet. There are moments in a fight when time fractures, not from magic, not from power, but from the weight of meaning. Every breath drawn in those moments feels stolen. Every heartbeat is a choice. When Orin and I clashed, that fracture tore through everything. Our flames met at the center of the world, not just of land, but of belief, and for the first time, the flame didn't roar. It listened. His strike was elegant, rehearsed, and deadly. Mine was raw, imperfect, forged through guilt and pain. We moved through a storm of light and ash, our weapons trailing echoes of everything we had become. The fire tree behind him bent under the weight of our fury, its branches dimming one by one. Orin pressed forward, unrelenting. You could have been this, he hissed, blade of heat crashing against mine. You could have lit a new age, but you chose fear. No, I growled, pushing back. I chose restraint. He spun, molten arcs slicing air as he threw a wave of flame at me. I dove under it, rolled through smoldering gravel, came up swinging. He parried and staggered. He wasn't invincible. He was burning out. Behind us, Saris and Kale held the line. The awakened were strong, yes, but undisciplined. Fractured. Some even stopped mid-fight, eyes watching the duel like it decided everything. And maybe it did. Orin's next attack faltered. His breaths came faster. The veins in his arms pulsed with too much power, his skin splitting in cracks of glowing gold. Why won't you fall? He choked. Because I already did, I said, stepping into him, locking our blades. And I stood back up. Then I let go. Of the fear, of the guilt, of the part of me that had always wondered if I was just a vessel for destruction. And the flame responded. It didn't surge. It settled. A pulse of calm fire rippled from my chest, not as an explosion, but as a heartbeat. The fires around us dimmed, responding not to rage or conquest, but choice. Orin froze, staring down at his own hands as the fire in him sputtered, flickered, then unraveled like mist on a cold wind. No, he whispered, stumbling. No, it was supposed to obey. The flame was never meant to be ruled, I said. Only carried. Orin collapsed, the crown of fire on his brow vanishing in a sigh of smoke. He didn't burn. He didn't scream. He just faded. A single ember drifted from his chest and vanished into the sky. Silence fell. The awakened lowered their weapons. The tree of fire behind us crumbled, branch by branch, until nothing remained but cooled stone and memory. The battle was over. Not with a final blow, but with a decision. Kale stepped beside me, bloodied but alive. Is it over? I nodded. Not for the world. But for us, yes. Saris looked to the sky, where faint lights still danced in the high air. What happens to the flame now? I stared into the horizon, where new sparks would one day rise. It finds others. But now they'll know. The flame doesn't make you more. It reveals who you already are. We buried what remained of Orin beneath the black soil of Darrigal. I didn't speak during the rites. There was nothing left to say. Days later, we walked again, across lands changed but not ruined. The awakened dispersed, many seeking to understand their gift, a few vowing to help others like them. The world would never be what it was. But it didn't need to be. The fire still lived, but it no longer hunted. It waited, for the right hands, for the right hearts. And as for me, I still feel it inside. A quiet ember, no longer screaming, no longer in control. Just there, a reminder, a companion, a warning. I am not the saint. I am not a god. I am the one who carried the fire and set it down. Where the flame leads next, that's not my story anymore. But I'll be watching.